Chapter 1, Prologue. Mark Smith died with equations still racing through his mind. One moment he was crossing the street, distracted by thoughts of a particularly elegant solution to the thermal conductivity problem that had plagued his research team for months, and the next impact. A delivery truck, horn blaring too late, tires screaming against asphalt. Pain flared white-hot across his consciousness, then vanished altogether. Darkness enveloped him. Time stretched in the void, or perhaps it ceased to exist altogether. Mark floated in it, or perhaps it floated through him. The distinction seemed meaningless here. Interesting, he thought, with the detached curiosity that had defined his 32 years of life. So this is death. He had always imagined nothingness would be more, nothing. Until something shifted in the darkness. A pinprick of light bloomed before him, expanding into a luminous presence that took shape gradually, a figure of indeterminate form, radiating energy that seemed to bend the very fabric of the void around it. Mark Smith, the entity intoned, its voice neither male nor female but something altogether different. The words formed directly in his consciousness, carrying neither gender nor accent, merely meaning. You are among the fortunate few. Mark would have frowned if he still possessed a face. Fortunate seemed a strange descriptor for someone recently pulverized by several tons of metal. Fortunate, he thought back. Indeed. You have been selected for rebirth. Your time in your realm has ended, but your journey continues. The darkness around them transformed, coalescing into a chamber of sorts, though its walls seemed to stretch into infinity. Before him materialized 3 massive wheels, each taller than he had been in life, adorned with countless symbols and images that flickered and shifted as if alive. The multiverse is vast beyond comprehension, the entity continued. Countless worlds exist alongside your own, worlds you glimpsed only through the stories you so cherished. A pang of emotion swept through Mark's non-existent heart. Those stories, the anime, games, and fictional worlds he'd immersed himself in whenever research pressures grew too intense had been his refuge. His colleagues had teased him mercilessly about his childish obsessions, but they'd never understood the elegant complexity, the raw creativity those worlds contained. I have to spin that, he asked, discovering that thought translated to communication in this place. The system is impartial, the entity explained. Your destination, your power, your lineage, all determined by chance. 3 spins will shape your new existence. The first wheel pulsed with anticipation. Begin with power, the entity instructed. What abilities will you carry into your new life? Mark hesitated. His scientific mind rebelled against this impossibility, searching for rational explanation. Hallucination, perhaps, or dying neurons firing in chaotic patterns. Yet something deeper recognized truth when confronted with it. With what felt like a phantom limb, Mark reached out and set the first wheel spinning. Countless symbols blurred together as it rotated with impossible speed. He recognized some from fiction, a lightning bolt scar, a circular shield with a star, a green ring, while others seemed to pulse with concepts rather than clear imagery. Fragments of images flashed through his awareness, fire dancing across outstretched fingers, shadows bending to wool, light condensing into blades, creatures bound to human masters. He watched, mesmerized, as it gradually slowed, symbols flashing past, a pair of red eyes with comma-like tomo, a lightning-wreathed fist, a brain pulsing with telepathic waves, metallic spheres orbiting a central point. With a final shudder, the wheel stopped. It came to rest on a symbol of a black canine silhouette with glowing red eyes, a sword-like marking on its forehead. Canis Lykaon, it murmured, something like appreciation coloring its tone. A dangerous gift indeed. One of the 13 Longinus sacred gears, an independent avatar type. The dog god of the Black Blade. Mark felt confusion ripple through him. I don't understand. Few do. At first, the entity replied. In its realm of origin, it possesses power sufficient to slay gods themselves. The entity rippled with what might have been appreciation. The god of the Bible crafted it from two sources: the cursed King Lykaon of Arcadia, transformed to a wolf by Zeus's wrath, and no Haberi, a divine sword from Shintoism used to slay Hinokagutsuki. The distortion from merging these disparate elements transformed the wolf into a dog, and the curse tainted the blade, stripping its divinity and creating something darker. High School DxD, thought Mark. The fusion distorted both original elements, the entity continued. Merging these disparate elements transformed the wolf into a dog, the wolf became a dog, and the curse tainted the divine blade. It lost its heavenly nature, becoming something darker, more primal. In your hands, it may become something else entirely. Mark struggled to process this information, his scientific mind rebelling against concepts of gods and divine weapons. I don't understand what any of this means, Mark admitted. You will, the entity assured him. A Longinus adapts to its wielder, absorbing their abilities and creativity. It becomes a vessel for their desires and ambitions. The symbol pulsed once, twice, then burned itself into Mark's consciousness. Knowledge flooded him, understanding of what he would become, what power would flow through his veins in his next life. Images flashed through Mark's mind: a massive wolf with shadow-like tendrils extending from its form, a blade that seemed to drink light rather than reflect it, a bond between beast and master that transcended ordinary understanding. Suddenly, he returned back to the present. But he felt heavier. The second wheel loomed before him, massive and intricate. Unlike the first wheel with its abstract symbols of power, this one displayed breathtaking vistas and landscapes: snow-capped mountains piercing cloud-laden skies, dense forests with trees larger than skyscrapers, sprawling desert wastelands, underwater cities glowing with bioluminescence, and urban metropolises both recognizable and utterly alien. Each segment contained entire worlds compressed into symbolic representations, some bearing sigils or crests that Mark recognized from fiction, others entirely unknown. The Wheel of Worlds, the entity explained. Your destination in the vast multiverse. Mark's non-corporeal form trembled with anticipation. The scientific part of him, the part that had spent years pursuing rational explanations for physical phenomena, continued to insist this was impossible. Yet another part of him, that section that had devoured stories and imagined other realms since childhood, surged with excitement. He reached out, setting the massive wheel spinning with a gentle push. It rotated with gathering momentum. The landscapes blurred together, a kaleidoscope of potential destinies. He caught glimpses of impossible architecture, alien skies, familiar skylines from Earth, medieval castles, futuristic cityscapes, and strange symbols he couldn't begin to interpret. He saw a school for wizards, a world where giant humanoids devoured people, a continent where elemental bending was practiced. The wheel began to slow. Mark watched, breathless despite having no lungs, as the final options flickered past. Then it stopped. The image flickered, panning across an entire world. Mark saw flashes of a vast continent, desert wastes where bronze-skinned warriors in hoods rode giant lizards, towering mountains where isolated clans kept ancient traditions, sprawling cities with spires and harbors, grasslands where horse lords thundered across endless plains. Then the view shifted to another continent where dragons had once ruled, stone cities baking under foreign suns, and further still to frozen wastelands where things stirred beyond an immense wall of ice. Westeros. Essos. The lands beyond the wall, Mark thought, or rippling through his non-corporeal form. A song of ice and fire, the entity confirmed. A world of harsh winters, ancient magic, and political intrigue. A curious choice for one with your power. Winter is coming, as they say. The second wheel's choice burned into Mark's consciousness alongside his newfound power. The Black Wolf and the world of ice and fire, somehow they would merge, though he couldn't yet imagine how. Canis Lykaon had never existed in George R.R. Martin's world of political machinations and ancient threats. The convergence of foreign power with native magic creates interesting possibilities, the entity said, seeming to read his thoughts. The third wheel materialized fully now. The final wheel, the entity said, your lineage and starting position. This wheel bore countless family crests, sigils, and symbols representing various houses, clans, and bloodlines from the world of ice and fire. Some Mark recognized immediately: the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen, the golden lion of Lannister, the kraken of Greyjoy. Your blood and birth will determine much, the entity explained. Though not everything. Even the lowliest can rise, with sufficient will and fortune. Mark hesitated, his thoughts racing. Where in this brutal world would offer the best chance of survival? The North with its harsh but honorable ways? The political viper's nest of King's Landing? The distant but wealthy shores of Essos? Each had advantages and mortal dangers. With a final mental push, he set the third wheel spinning, watching as the sigils blurred into a kaleidoscope of potential destinies. The wheel slowed gradually, a familiar landscape filled the chosen segment, a massive ice wall stretching across a northern frontier, a castle of grey stone built above hot springs, a crimson weirwood tree with a solemn face carved into its trunk, and a dire wolf sigil. Mark couldn't believe it. If he'd still possessed a physical form, his heart would have pounded against his ribs. Westeros. The North. Winterfell. A song of ice and fire, the entity confirmed. A world of harsh winters, ancient magic, and political intrigue. A curious choice for one with your power. A wild, incredulous joy surged through Mark's consciousness. Of all the possible worlds, this one, the setting of books he had read and reread until their spines cracked, a show he had analyzed episode by episode, a world whose maps and histories he knew better than his own hometowns. A universe he had studied obsessively, analyzing fan theories, debating timeline discrepancies with online communities. This can't be happening, he thought, with growing excitement. Westeros, with the sacred gear. It was unbelievable, that his luck that would land him in precisely the fictional world he had spent countless hours obsessing over seemed too perfect, too tailored to his secret passions. The convergence is unusual, the entity acknowledged, rippling slightly as if considering the implications. Your power originates from a different cosmology entirely. Its introduction to this realm will create interesting distortions. Mark barely heard the entity's words. His mind raced with possibilities. The political intrigues of King's Landing, the ancient mysteries beyond the wall, the looming threat of the others, all would be navigable with the power of Canis Lykaon at his side. The wheels do not lie, the entity replied, seeming to sense his thoughts. Though I must warn you, the reality may differ from the stories you know. The multiverse contains infinite variations, and the narrative you consumed may be merely one interpretation of countless possible Westeros. The timeline you are born at may be unfamiliar to you. Mark absorbed this caution, but his excitement remained undiminished. Even with variations, even with differences, this was a world he understood at a fundamental level. Its politics, its geography, its dangers, all familiar territory. I see you appreciate the wheel's choices, the entity observed, its formless presence shifting slightly. The time has come. I'll send your soul away now. All the best to you, lucky soul. Before Mark could respond, the chamber around him began to dissolve. The wheels faded into mist, and the presence of the entity grew dimmer. He felt himself being pulled away, drawn through an invisible veil, his consciousness stretching and compressing simultaneously. The void closed around him, and then there was nothing but darkness and a sense of rushing forward, faster and faster, toward an unknown destination. As the soul vanished into the ether, bound for its new existence, the entity remained in the void, its energy pulsing with what might have been amusement. Truly fortunate, it mused to itself, the chamber now empty save for its presence. One in countless billions receives such a convergence of desire and destiny. The entity's form rippled, reconsidering the wheel's selections. While the soul had received exactly what it wanted, there remained unseen complications. The sacred gear chosen was not merely a tool or weapon, but something more complex. Canis Lykaon, the entity whispered to the empty void. Of all the powers to bestow upon a soul entering that particular realm, the entity recalled the nature of this particular sacred gear, not merely a weapon, but a sentient being with its own will, its own desires. Unlike many sacred gears that simply obeyed their wielders, Canis Lykaon formed bonds of fierce loyalty with those it deemed worthy. It did not merely serve, it protected, guarded, defended its host's soul with a ferocity that bordered on possessiveness. The void pulsed around the entity as it contemplated the soul's journey ahead. Would it even survive the awakening? The introduction of such foreign power into the world of ice and fire would create ripples, distortions in the fabric of that reality. Ancient magics would respond to the intrusion, either in harmony or in opposition. The delicate balance of forces, the old gods, the new, the Lord of Light, the many-faced god, the deep magic of the children of the forest, all would sense the arrival of something alien to their realm. Perhaps, the entity considered, this is why the wheels chose as they did. Balance seeking balance, even across the boundaries of worlds. With that final thought, the entity's attention shifted away from the departed soul. There were countless others waiting in the void between lives, countless journeys to oversee. The story of Mark Smith and Canis Lykaon would unfold now without its observation, one more tale among infinite possibilities in the vast, endless multiverse. _ 128 AC. The chill of winter permeated Winterfell's ancient stones, but another sound pierced the night, a woman's agonized screams echoing through the corridors of the great castle. Within the birthing chamber, Lady Arra Norrey clutched the bedposts, her knuckles white with strain, her body convulsing with the effort of bringing new life into the world. Sweat-soaked hair clung to her face as the midwife urged her to push once more. Blood pooled beneath her, darkening the sheets with alarming speed. Too much blood. The maester and the midwives exchanged grim glances as they worked, their movements growing increasingly frantic as they tried to stem the bleeding. When at last the child emerged, a boy, his lusty cries filled the chamber, a defiant announcement of his arrival. But his mother's screams did not transform into the expected sounds of relief and joy. Instead, they weakened, fading into shallow gasps as her life force ebbed away with each passing heartbeat. Lord Cregan Stark, a young man of 20 named days, who had been pacing outside the chamber door, rushed to his wife's side. His face, normally impassive, crumpled as he took in the scene, his infant son alive and wailing, his wife pale and silent, her eyes staring unseeing at the timber ceiling. The howl that tore from Cregan's throat was primal, a sound of raw anguish that seemed to shake the very foundations of Winterfell. The wolf's blood, they would later whisper in the castle halls. The grief of a Stark is as fierce as their sigil. Through it all, the infant continued his plaintive cries, oblivious to the tragedy surrounding his birth, to the fact that his first breath had coincided with his mother's last. The midwife swaddled him tightly in wool blankets bearing the dire wolf sigil, a small attempt at comfort amid sorrow. "My lord," a midwife whispered, gently handing the newborn to Sagan the newborn, while the others worked desperately over Lady Arra's still form. "A son. Strong and healthy." "Rickon," Lord Cregan whispered hoarsely as he reaches out to tenderly cradle the child, naming the boy even as tears tracked down his stubbled cheeks. "Named for my father." In that moment, as the Lord of Winterfell clutched the still body of his wife, something stirred in the godswood beyond the castle walls. The heart tree's carved face seemed to weep red sap, and beneath the frozen ground, ancient magics shifted and realigned. The old gods had taken notice of the child's birth, a child whose arrival had been marked by both joy and sorrow, by life and death intertwined. Deep within the infant's soul, something else awakened, a presence, dormant but aware, waiting for the proper time to manifest. A shadow that would one day take form, a companion bound to the boy by threads of fate stronger than Valyrian steel. Outside the castle walls, a wolf howled in the wolf's wood, the sound carrying across the snow-covered landscape. Some would later claim it was an omen, a sign from the old gods themselves. Others dismissed it as mere coincidence, a wild creature calling to its pack on a cold winter's night. None could have known the truth, that within little Rickon Stark slumbered a power unlike any Westeros had seen before, a convergence of magics from beyond the boundaries of their world. A sacred gear, waiting to awaken. For now, though, Rickon Stark was simply a newborn, cradled against his father's chest, his cries eventually subsiding into hiccuping sobs. __. The castle around them fell into mourning, black banners replacing the grey and white of House Stark, as preparations began for Lady Arra's journey to the crypts beneath Winterfell, where generations of Starks watched with stone eyes from the darkness. Maester Kenneth examined the child with careful hands. "A strong boy, my lord," he confirmed, his chain clinking softly as he moved. "Though born amidst tragedy, he shows no ill effects. The Stark blood runs true in him." Cregan nodded, his grief momentarily overshadowed by a father's pride and responsibility. "He will need a wet nurse," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And in time, he will need to learn what it means to be a Stark of Winterfell. What it meant to be a Stark." The words unspoken hung in the air between them. Winter is coming. It always was, for House Stark, in one form or another. "Let's go. This is a big project of mine. Really hope you guys enjoy this story. Canis Lykaon is an epic sacred gear, and I'm going to love exploring it in the Azoth setting. And just so you know, rebirth isn't as straightforward as you think." Chapter 2, Chapter 1, The Awakening, I. 131 AC. Rickon Stark ran his stubby fingers along the cold stone walls of Winterfell, feeling the bumpy, scratchy parts where the runes were carved deep. The stones felt alive sometimes, all buzzy and warm when he pressed his palm flat against them. The grown UPS couldn't feel it. He asked Aunt Sara once, and she laughed and ruffled his hair. "Just the hot springs beneath us, little wolf," she had said. But Rickon knew better. The stones were talking. Not with words exactly, but with feelings that tickled his fingertips and made his tummy feel funny. Today, he was being a shadowcat, stalking through the corridors on tippy toes. Father was having an important meeting with the bannermen, and Rickon wasn't supposed to listen. But listening was easy when nobody thought you understood. He crouched behind a tapestry, the dusty fabric making his nose itch. Through the tiny gap, he could see Father's serious face, all frowny and tired looking. "The Greens press their advantage," Father was saying. "If Queen Rhaenyra cannot hold King's Landing." The words made Rickon's head feel fuzzy, like remembering something he'd forgotten, except he'd never known it to begin with. He saw flashes of dragons in his mind, big and scary with fire coming out of their mouths. But he'd never seen a dragon. His tummy growled loudly, and one of the men looked toward the tapestry. Rickon held his breath until his cheeks puffed out. When the man looked away, he scampered off on all fours, still pretending to be a shadowcat. "And what mischief are we about today, young lord?" came Maester Kenneth's gentle voice. Rickon darted away, giggling despite being caught. His small legs carried him swiftly down the corridor, the stone floor cool beneath his bare feet. The maester's chuckles faded behind him as he rounded a corner, nearly colliding with a serving girl carrying linens. She sidestepped him with practiced ease, used to the young Stark's perpetual motion. In the kitchens, the Mara, the head cook, gave him a honey cake and a cup of warm milk. Rickon sat on a barrel, swinging his legs and watching the kitchen people bustle around. The honey stuck to his fingers, and he licked them one by one. The castle was his playground, every nook and hidden passage a new adventure waiting to be discovered. Yesterday, he had been a night battling grumpkins in the kitchens, much to kitchen workers' dismay. The day before, he'd been a wildling scout hiding in the stables, watching the stab lemon with solemn intensity until Helen had offered him an apple and a pat on the head. "There you are, you little scamp." Aunt Sara, his father's bastard half-sister, appeared in the doorway, hands on her hips but smiling. She was a beautiful young woman of 18, her dark hair plaited in a tight braid that hung down her back, her stark grey eyes bright with mischief that belied the paleness of her skin. The silver dire wolf pin that had once belonged to her mother caught the morning light as it held her practical northern woolens together at her throat. "Been looking everywhere for you." "I was being quiet," Rickon said proudly. "Too quiet." She scooped him up, honey fingers and all. "Bath time, and then Maester Kennett wants to see how your letters are coming along." Rickon wrinkled his nose. "Don't want a bath." "Don't want doesn't matter," Sara said, carrying him away from the warm kitchens. "Little lords must be clean, especially ones covered in honey." Later, scrubbed pink and dressed in fresh clothes, Rickon sat at the small desk in the maester's chambers, carefully tracing the shapes of letters with a piece of charcoal. His tongue stuck out the side of his mouth as he concentrated. "Remarkable," Maester Kennett murmured, watching him form a perfect letters. "Most children twice your age struggle so." Rickon didn't look up. Drawing the letters was easy. They looked like the runes in the walls, only simpler. Sometimes when he closed his eyes, he could see all kinds of letters and symbols, dancing behind his eyelids. That night, tucked into his bed with furs pulled to his chin, Rickon listened to Aunt Sara tell the story of Bran the Builder. "And he built the wall so high, higher than the tallest tower of Winterfell, to keep the monsters away," she said, her voice getting quiet and spooky. "What monsters?" Rickon asked, even though he'd heard the story 100 times. "The others," Sara whispered. "With eyes like blue stars and skin as white as snow." Rickon shivered deliciously. "Father says winter is coming." That's our words." "But winter is still far away, little wolf." Sara kissed his forehead. "Sleep now." But after she left, Rickon didn't sleep. He stared at the shadows on his ceiling, watching them stretch and move. One shadow looked like a wolf, big and scary with eyes that glowed. It seemed to be watching him back. "Hello," Rickon whispered. The shadow wolf's tail seemed to wag, just a little. Rickon smiled and closed his eyes, drifting into dreams where he ran through snowy forests on 4 legs instead of 2, with shadows trailing behind him like faithful friends. ___. Morning brought a shift to Winterfell's rhythm. Rickon felt it before he opened his eyes, a strange humming in the stones beneath his bed, an unusual bustle in the corridors. He slipped from his furs, the cold floor greeting his bare feet as he padded to his window. The courtyard below teemed with activity. Men in armor. Horses laden with supplies. Banners snapping in the northern wind, the grey dire wolf of House Stark predominant among them, but others too, the Merman of Manderley, the chained giant of Umber, the bear of Mormont. "There you are," Aunt Sara said, entering his chamber with a bundle of clothes. Her face looked tight, her usual smile strained at the edges. "We need to dress you properly today." "Why?" Rickon asked, though something in his belly already knew the answer. The strange knowledge that sometimes came to him unbidden, like memories that weren't his own. "Your father rides south today," Sara said, helping him into a fine wool tunic embroidered with dire wolves around the collar. "The lords have gathered to see him off." "Because of the dragons?" Rickon asked. Sara's hands paused in their work. "How did you, never mind." "Yes, little wolf. Because of the dragons and their riders who fight for the throne." The great hall was filled to bursting when Aunt Sara led him there, hand clasped tightly in hers. Lords and ladies in their finest garb stood in solemn rows, their faces grim as winter. Father sat in the great chair, ice laid across his knees, the Valyrian steel catching the light from the high windows. He looked different today, not just father, but Lord Stark, the Warden of the North. Rickon was brought to stand before him, and the hall fell silent. Even the stones seemed to hold their breath. Father rose, magnificent in his grey armour with its snarling wolf helm tucked beneath his arm. The plates gleamed dully in the torchlight, ancient and terrible. His brown hair fell in waves around his neck. He looked so tall, towering above Rickon like the kings of winter in the crypts. Then, to Rickon's surprise, Father knelt. One knee touched the stone floor, bringing those stormy grey eyes level with Rickon's own. Behind them, Rickon heard murmurs ripple through the crowd. "Rickon," Father said, his voice low but carrying in the silent hall. "I ride south with our bannermen. While I am gone, Winterfell must have a Stark to guard it." Rickon's chest felt tight, too small suddenly for his heart. The stones beneath his feet thrummed with approval. "Winterfell is yours until I return," Father said, placing a heavy hand on Rickon's shoulder. "You are young, but you are a Stark. The blood of the first men flows in your veins. Remember our words." "Winter is coming," Rickon whispered, the words feeling ancient on his tongue. Father nodded once, his expression softening for just a moment. Then he stood, towering once more, and placed the wolf helm over his head. The transformation was complete, no longer just Father, but the Wolf of the North, as the bannermen had taken to calling him. The lords filed past, each kneeling briefly before Rickon, pledging to serve faithfully in his father's absence. Their words blurred together, but Rickon stood straight-backed and solemn as the statues in the crypts, knowing this moment was important even if he didn't fully understand why. Later, from the battlements, he watched the column of men wind away from Winterfell like a great steel serpent. The wind carried their banners high. "Will he come back?" Rickon asked Sara, who stood beside him with a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. "Of course he will," she said, but her grey eyes followed the departing host with hidden concern. "Your father is as strong and stubborn as the wall itself. When he slept that night, he dreamed of dragons battling each other and falling from the sky." 132 AC. Winterfell felt empty in his father's absence. The great stone halls echoed with each of Rickon's footsteps, making the castle seem larger, colder somehow. The servants moved with hushed voices and quick glances, as if afraid to disturb the heaviness that had settled over the ancient stronghold. Rickon noticed how people's faces changed when they thought he wasn't looking. The stable master's smile would fall away the moment he turned his back. The cooks whispered when they thought he'd left the kitchen. Even old Nan's stories had taken on darker tones, tales of long winters and the terrors that came with them. "Don't fret so, little wolf," Sara would say, smoothing his unruly hair with fingers rough from years of work. Her grey eyes shone with a warmth that contradicted the worry lines etched around them. Maester Kennet, too, offered reassurances, though his came wrapped in lessons and histories. "The North endures, young lord," he'd say, adjusting his chain with ink-stained fingers. "As do the Starks." But Rickon knew something was changing. The world beyond Winterfell's walls was burning, and the smoke had begun to drift northward. His fourth name day came and went with little celebration. A special meal, a new wooden sword, a sweet honey cake with candles. Nothing like the feast his father would have held, with music and gifts from the bannermen. That night, Rickon dreamed of snow falling on a field of fire, of shadows with gleaming teeth, and woke crying out for a father too far away to hear. The lessons with Maester Kennet increased in frequency and intensity after that. Each morning found Rickon perched on a cushioned stool in the Maester's tower, surrounded by scrolls and maps and books with cracking leather spines. "House Manderley," the Maester would say, pointing to the map spread across the table. "White Harbour," Rickon would answer promptly. "The Merman." "Lords of the Sea." "Good." And their words. Rickon's brow furrowed in concentration. A promise well kept. A smile tugged at Kennet's weathered face. Indeed. And House Umber. Last Hearth. The Chained Giant. Death before chains. On and on they went, through the houses of the north, Mormont, Karstark, Bolton, Glover, Reed, until Rickon could recite their seats and sigils and words without hesitation. Then came the southern houses, more numerous and complicated, with their knights and their summer castles. Numbers followed, scratched onto slates with chalk that left his fingers dusty and white. Rickon learned to count beyond what his small hands could show, to add bushels of grain and subtract men lost to winter. He learned the measures of the stores, how many mouths Winterfell could feed through a year of snow, how many men could be armed from its forges. A lord must know the strength of his keep, Maester Kennett explained, watching Rickon's small face pinch with concentration. The common tongue came next, its letters strange and angular compared to the flowing runes that sometimes appeared in his dreams. Rickon traced them carefully, over and over, until his hand cramped and his eyes burned. "Your father will be proud when he returns," Aunt Sara told him one evening as she tucked him into bed, his fingers still stained with ink. "You're learning faster than children thrice your age." Rickon stared up at the canopy of his bed, at the shadows that danced across it from the hearth fire. "When will he come home?" Sara's hand paused in smoothing his furs. "When the fighting is done, little wolf." "And when will that be?" She had no answer for that, only a kiss pressed to his forehead and a whispered prayer to the old gods. "Where is Mark?" you may be thinking. Don't worry, memories will emerge over time, before the awakening. Hope you enjoyed the chapter. Chapter 3, Chapter 2, The Awakening, 2. 132 AC. In late 132 AC, a raven arrived at Winterfell bearing 3 simple words: "King's Landing is taken." The blackbird's wings had barely ceased fluttering before the castle erupted into a flurry of activity and gossip. Rickon stood in the shadows of the great hall, watching as servants scurried past with bundles of correspondence. At 4 name days, he was deemed far too young to participate in council meetings, yet he was old enough to sense the gravity of what transpired. The whispers reached him regardless. Father had done something extraordinary in the south, something that made even hardened northern warriors speak in hushed, reverent tones. The Hour of the Wolf, they called it. 6 days when the north held the fate of the 7 kingdoms in its grasp. The tales trickled north like melting ice, each raven bringing fragments that Rickon collected with quiet diligence. He learned how his father had marched south with his winter wolves, ostensibly to support Queen Rhaenyra's claim to the Iron Throne, only to arrive after her death. How father had refused to bend to southern whims, demanding justice even when the war was effectively over. A dance of dragons, something whispered in his mind. He sat at the foot of the Iron Throne, Maester Kennett had told him, eyes alight with unusual fervor. Not on it, mind you. Lord Cregan administered the realm's justice while the boy King Aegon watched from Maegor's holdfast. The image formed in Rickon's mind, his father's tall figure, eyes gleaming in his hands, northern justice dispensed in southern halls. 22 men condemned for their treachery. The King's Guard knight who abandoned his post. The Grand Maester who poisoned a king. Lord Larys Strong, the clubfoot, who offered no defense for his crimes. Rickon! Rickon! Edda's voice echoed through the corridor, her hurried footsteps slapping against the worn stone. She rounded the corner at full speed, dark curls bouncing wildly around her flushed face. "Have you eared? Everyone's talking about it in the kitchens." "Lord Stark." Edda's warm brown eyes widened as she skidded to a halt before him. She was breathing hard, clearly having run through half the castle to find him. "They say he sat on the Iron Throne." Edda was a young small folk girl of Rickon's age who was the bastard daughter of a cook. She had become a playmate of Rickon's. "Not exactly the Iron Throne," Rickon corrected, though his silver-grey eyes gleamed with unmistakable pride. "Father would never sit upon it. He administered justice from its foot." Edda bounced on her toes, her short brown hair flopping around face, and her scraped knees visible beneath her woolen dress. "But that's even more impressive, isn't it? Everyone says so. Standing before the throne rather than upon it, like he's saying the North bows to no one, not even when we rule." They slipped away from the busy corridor, finding refuge in the small alcove near the kitchens where they often shared secrets. The smell of baking bread wafted around them, comforting and warm against the persistent chill of Winterfell's stones. "They're calling him the hand who held a sword instead of a pin," Rickon grinned. Father condemned 22 men to death for their treachery. He executed them himself with ice. Edda's eyes widened to perfect circles. All of them? With ice? Use like the old ways. Just like the old ways, Rickon nodded solemnly. The Southerners have never seen northern justice before. Father made them watch as he swung the blade himself. Underscore. Another raven arrived a week later. As Maester Ketan read the scroll, his weathered face drawn into lines of contemplation. It seems your Lord Father's campaign has reached its conclusion, he said, his voice carrying across the solar where Rickon sat upon a cushioned stool, legs dangling well above the stone floor. Rickon blinked, the words washing over him like waves upon a distant shore. These concepts swirled in his mind, half-formed and nebulous. He knew his father had gone away with many men on horses, their breath steaming in the cold morning air as they departed through Winterfell's gates. The memory felt both fresh and impossibly distant, as if viewed through clouded glass. "Does this mean Father returns?" he asked, his small voice carrying a solemnity that often startled those who served House Stark. Before the Maester could answer, the door burst open and Sara Snow strode in, her face alight with rare animation. "The ravens are coming thick as summer snow now," she announced. "Cregan rides north with the host. He sends word to prepare for his return, and a wedding." "A wedding?" Rickon echoed, the word familiar yet strange on his tongue. "Aye, little wolf," Sara said, picking him up and plopping in her lap. "Your father takes a new wife. Lady Alice Anne of House Blackwood. The ceremony is to be held in our very own God's Wood, beneath the heart tree's watching eyes." The God's Wood. Rickon felt a curious tingle at the base of his skull whenever he thought of that ancient place. His father often took him there when he was at home. "When will they arrive?" Maester Ketan asked, already calculating provisions and accommodations. "A fortnight, perhaps less if the weather holds," Sara replied. "The northern host has disbanded at the neck, each lord returning to his own keep, but Lord Stark rides hard for Winterfell with his bride's party." Rickon slipped from his stool, suddenly restless. A new mother. The thought was confusing. He had never known his birth mother, who had died bringing him into the world. What was a mother meant to be? What would this Blackwood lady expect of him? "Come, Rickon," Sara said, extending her hands. "Let us walk to the God's Wood. The old gods should hear your thoughts." As they traversed the corridors of Winterfell, servants bustled past with renewed purpose, the news of Lord Stark's imminent return already spreading like wildfire. Preparations for a wedding would soon consume the entire castle. Rickon felt the change in the air, a shift in the rhythm of the great stone fortress that was his home. The God's Wood greeted them with its primeval silence, snow crunching beneath their boots as they approached the heart tree. "The lady comes from the south, but she keeps the old gods," Sara murmured, her breath forming clouds in the chill air. "A Blackwood, descended from the first men, like us northerners." Rickon placed his small palm against the heart tree's rough bark. Something stirred within him, a sensation both familiar and alien, like remembering a dream he had never dreamt. The carved face seemed to watch him, its sap-red eyes knowing. "Bloodraven," a voice whispered. "Will she?" he began, unsure how to form the question burning in his mind. "Will she love you?" Sara finished for him, her eyes kind. "That remains to be seen, little wolf. But remember this, you are the blood of Winterfell, and these stones know you. These trees remember you." Underscore. The fortnight passed in a blur of preparations. Rickon watched as Winterfell transformed itself from a stern northern fortress into something approaching festivity. Banners unfurled from towers, their dire wolves snapping in the brisk wind. The scent of roasting meat and baking bread wafted constantly from the kitchens, where harried cooks prepared for the great feast to welcome home the Lord of Winterfell and his new bride. Wintertown, usually dormant until the deep snows of winter, buzzed with activity. Merchants had appeared seemingly overnight, their carts laden with wares rarely seen in the north, bolts of fine southern cloth, exotic spices, and trinkets from distant ports. Children darted between stalls, their laughter carrying on the wind while their parents haggled over prices inflated for the occasion. On the morning of his father's expected arrival, Rickon woke before dawn, his stomach knotted with a curious mixture of anticipation and dread. He dressed carefully, refusing the help of the serving girl who usually assisted with his formal attire. The wool of his doublet scratched at his neck, freshly embroidered with running wolves and silver thread. "You look a proper little lord," Aunt Sara remarked when he appeared for breakfast, her eyes softening as she straightened his collar. "Your father will be proud." Rickon nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. Would his father be proud? And what of this new lady, this Black Ali from the south? Would she look at him and see only a child in her way, an obstacle between her and her new position? By midday, Rickon stood at the gates of Winterfell, his small back straight despite the cold wind that cut through his cloak. The household had assembled in formal lines, from the highest steward to the lowest stably boy. Sir Hallis Glover stood beside him, grim-faced and watchful as always. The distant thunder of hooves announced the approaching party before they came into view. Rickon's heart quickened as the northern host appeared on the horizon, their banners unfurling like dark wings against the pale sky. His father rode at the head of the column, eyes strapped across his back, its hilt rising above his shoulder like a silent sentinel. The months away had changed him, his hair fell longer around his shoulders, his face more deeply lined than Rickon remembered. Most striking was the thick, bushy brown beard that now covered his jaw, giving him the appearance of one of the wild mountain clansmen rather than the Lord of Winterfell. And beside him, mounted on a chestnut palfrey, rode a dark-haired woman whose sharp eyes missed nothing as they swept across the assembled household. "Lady Alice Anne Blackwood," Sir Hallis Glover murmured beside Rickon. "Black Ali, they call her in the south. The soon-to-be Lady of Winterfell." Rickon studied her with cautious intensity. She sat tall in her saddle, her posture speaking of a lifetime of careful cultivation. But her hair was a mane of thick black curls that tumbled down past her waist. The Blackwood raven was embroidered subtly at the collar of her riding dress, a reminder of her lineage despite her imminent transition to House Stark. The party came to a halt before the gates. For a moment, silence fell over the courtyard, heavy with expectation. Then Lord Cregan dismounted in a fluid motion that belied his weariness from the long journey. His eyes found Rickon immediately, and something in his stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. "My son," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. Rickon stepped forward, remembering his courtesies despite the urge to run to his father like a much younger child. He bowed formally, as befitted the heir to Winterfell. "Welcome home, father." Cregan strode forward. Strong arms encircled him, lifting him clear off the ground in a fierce, warm embrace that smelled of horse and leather and the road. "My son," Cregan's voice rumbled against him, deeper than Rickon remembered. "You've grown." When his father set him down, Rickon found himself face to face with Lady Alice Anne, who had dismounted with the assistance of a southern knight. Up close, he could see she was tall and thin, with a narrow oval face and high cheekbones. Her eyes were a light hazel, a mix of greens, browns, and golds. He could see the careful assessment in her gaze as she regarded him. "My lady," Cregan said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note that Rickon couldn't quite identify. "May I present my son and heir, Rickon Stark?" "My Lord Rickon," she said, her voice melodious yet firm. She extended her hands, taking his small ones in her own. Her fingers were warm despite the northern chill. "I have heard much about you during our journey north. Your father speaks of you with great pride." Rickon bowed as he had been taught, though his eyes never left her face. "Welcome to Winterfell, my lady. The north is honored by your presence." Something flickered in her expression, surprise, perhaps, at his formal manner, before she smiled. It was a careful smile, measured and contained, but it reached her eyes nonetheless. "The honor is mine, Lord Rickon. I look forward to knowing the North, and its people," better in the days to come. As the household moved forward to welcome their lord home, Rickon found himself studying the woman who would become his stepmother. She moved with graceful efficiency, greeting each person presented to her with appropriate warmth while missing nothing of her surroundings. Her eyes constantly swept the courtyard, the walls, the people, cataloguing, assessing, remembering. The feast that night was unlike anything Winterfell had seen in years. The great hall blazed with torchlight, and the trestle tables groaned under the weight of venison, roast fowl, and freshly baked bread. Musicians played northern ballads interspersed with southern tunes that sounded strange yet not unpleasant to Rickon's ears. From his place at the high table, Rickon watched the revelry below. His father sat beside him, deep in conversation with Lady Alys, their heads inclined toward one another. The lord's expression remained stern as ever, but there was something in his posture, a slight softening of the shoulders, perhaps, that Rickon had rarely seen before. "She negotiated terms with him, you know," Sara murmured, appearing at his side with a cup of water. "Before she agreed to the marriage. That's what they're saying in the kitchens. He spared Lord Corlys Velaryon, for her hand in marriage. ___. Dawn broke pale and solemn over Winterfell on the day of the wedding. Rickon stood at his window, watching as the first golden rays filtered through the ancient pines, casting long shadows across the snow-covered courtyard. The castle had fallen into an expectant hush, the revelry of the previous nights giving way to something older, something sacred. 3 days had passed since his father's return, 3 days of feasts and introductions, of northern lords arriving to pay homage to their liege and witness the union. Yet today would be different. Today was for the old gods. When Rickon made his way to the Gods' Wood, the path had already been cleared of snow, revealing dark earth beneath. He followed the winding trail, his footsteps silent against the soft ground. The air grew still as he ventured deeper into the ancient grove, the sounds of the castle fading until all he could hear was his own breath, forming small clouds in the cold morning air. The heart tree waited at the center, its bone-white bark gleaming in the filtered sunlight, its blood-red leaves rustling despite the absence of wind. The face carved into its trunk seemed more alive today, its sap-weeping eyes watching as the small procession began to form around its massive girth. Lord Cregan stood before the weirwood, clad not in finery but in simple northern garb of leather and wool, the stark colors muted against the white bark. Ice was unsheathed, its Valyrian steel blade catching the light in ripples of darkness as it rested point down before him. The great sword seemed to drink in the shadows cast by the heart tree's canopy. Beside him stood Lord Clay Searwyn, his father's closest friend. He would be conducting the ceremony today. Rickon found his place at his father's side, feeling the weight of the moment press upon his small shoulders. The Gods' Wood had never felt so ancient to him, so aware. The carved face in the weirwood seemed to watch him with peculiar intensity, and he felt a strange tingling at the base of his skull, as if something were trying to reach out to him through the bark and sap. "The old gods are watching today," his father said quietly, his voice barely carrying beyond Rickon's ears. "They remember when the first men came to these lands, when the children of the forest carved these faces. They remember the pact made in those days, sealed in blood and promise." Before Rickon could respond, a hush fell over the gathered witnesses. Lady Alys approached through the trees, her path lined with winter roses and weirwood leaves. She wore no maiden's cloak in the southern fashion, only a simple dress of stark grey with subtle black wood embroidery at the sleeves. Her dark hair hung loose down her back, adorned only with a crown of weirwood leaves, their red stark against her black tresses. She moved with measured grace to stand before the heart tree, her eyes meeting Cregan's with unwavering directness. There was no septon to speak the words, no elaborate ceremony as in the south. In the north, marriage before the old gods required only truth, witnessed by the heart tree and those gathered. "Who comes before the old gods this day?" Lord Searwyn asked, his normally boisterous voice subdued in the sacred space. "Alys of House Blackwood," she replied, her voice clear in the stillness. "A woman grown and flowered, of noble birth and noble blood. I come to be Wednesday. Who claims her? Lord Cerwyn continued. Cregan of House Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, his father's voice rumbled, deep as the roots beneath their feet. I claim her. Lord Cerwyn nodded, then asked, Lady Alysanne, do you take this man? I take this man, she answered without hesitation. Lord Cregan, do you take this woman? I take this woman, Cregan affirmed. There was a moment of silence, broken only by the rustle of the weirwood's leaves. Then Cregan lifted eyes from where it rested against the heart tree. The great sword caught the light filtering through the canopy, its dark ripples seeming to move like water across its surface. The old way, he said, requires blood freely given before the gods. Rickon watched, transfixed, as his father turned the great sword in his hands, presenting its edge rather than its point. With deliberate care, Cregan drew the blade across his palm, opening a clean line that welled with dark blood. Without flinching, Lady Alysanne extended her hand to receive the same mark, her eyes never leaving the carved face of the heart tree as the Valyrian steel kissed her flesh. Their bloodied hands clasped together before the weirwood, red drops falling to the dark earth at the base of the ancient tree. The wind picked up suddenly, sending the heart tree's leaves into a frenzied dance above their heads, a whisper of countless voices seeming to rise from the rustling canopy. Blood of my blood, Cregan intoned, the words ancient and binding. Bone of my bone, Alysanne responded. Together they pressed their joined hands against the white bark of the heart tree, leaving a stark red handprint that mingled with the weeping sap of the carved face. Rickon felt a shiver run down his spine as the blood seemed to sink into the bark, absorbed by the living wood of the ancient tree. In that moment, the god's wood itself seemed to hold its breath. The air grew heavy with something Rickon could not name but could feel pressing against his skin, old and watchful. The carved face of the heart tree appeared to shift slightly, as if truly seeing the union before it, remembering and recording it in ways beyond human understanding. His father unwrapped a length of cloth from his belt, stark grey, and bound their wounded hands together, tying them with a knot that would leave them joined until the ceremony's conclusion. Blood seeped through the fabric, marking the binding in crimson testimony. What the old gods witness cannot be undone, Cregan declared to the assembled lords and ladies. Lady Alysanne Blackwood is now Lady Stark of Winterfell, under the protection of myself and my house. A solemn murmur of acknowledgement passed through the gathered witnesses, northern lords nodding with grave approval at the adherence to the old ways. Even the southerners among Lady Alysanne's retinue seemed touched by the primitive solemnity of the ceremony, so different from the pageantry of the faith. As they turned from the heart tree, still bound by the bloodied cloth, Rickon caught Lady Alysanne, now Lady Stark, watching him. There was something assessing in her gaze, but not unkind. She inclined her head to him slightly. The procession began to move back toward the castle, where a feast awaited to celebrate the union, but Rickon lingered for a moment, drawn by some inexplicable urge to remain in the presence of the heart tree. As the others departed, he approached the ancient weirwood, gazing up at the carved face with its sap-red tears. The handprint left by his father and new stepmother remained vivid against the white bark, the blood already darkening as it mingled with the tree's sap. Rickon reached out his small hand, not quite touching the mark but hovering near it, feeling a strange warmth radiating from the spot despite the winter chill. The old gods remember, he whispered, echoing his father's words. The tingling at the base of his skull intensified, and for the briefest moment, he thought he felt something, someone, reaching back to him through the ancient wood. The great hall of Winterfell blazed with light that evening, 100 tallow candles casting their golden glow upon the weathered stone walls. Rickon sat beside his father at the high table, watching as servants weaved between the crowded benches bearing platters heaped with steaming food. The scent of roasted meats mingled with the sharp tang of wine and the earthy aroma of fresh baked bread, creating a heady perfume that filled the cavernous space. Before him lay a feast fit for the gods themselves. Venison haunches glistened with honey glaze, their edges charred and crackling. Whole trout from the white knife had been baked in clay with winter herbs, their flesh flaking at the touch of a knife. Platters of roasted root vegetables, glazed with butter and sprinkled with salt harvested from the Bay of Seals, sat alongside bowls of steaming peas porridge thick enough to stand a spoon in. The kitchens had outdone themselves with meat pies sealed with golden crusts, their centers revealing savory fillings of rabbit, pigeon, and wild boar when broken open. Wine flowed like water, northern strong wine for the lords and sweet arbor gold for those with southern palates. Even the small folk seated at the lower tables received generous portions, their cups refilled whenever they emptied. The celebration of his father's marriage demanded nothing less than abundance, a display of Winterfell's prosperity under Stark rule. Rickon observed his father and Lady Alys-Anne, Lady Stark now, seated together at the center of the high table. His father's stern countenance had softened somewhat, his weathered face occasionally breaking into what might almost be called a smile as he conversed with his new wife. Lady Alys-Anne herself cracked jokes and laughed loudly, though Rickon noticed how her dark eyes constantly surveyed the hall, missing nothing of the dynamics playing out before her. The heat from the great hearths made the hall uncommonly warm, and the din of conversation grew louder as the wine took effect. Rickon picked at his food, his stomach fluttering with nervous anticipation. He had been practicing for days, sneaking away to empty chambers with Aunt Sara to prepare his gift. During a lull in the music, when the minstrels paused to rest their fingers and wet their throats, Rickon gathered his courage. He turned to his father, the words catching briefly in his throat before he managed to speak them. "Father," he said, his voice soft enough that only those nearest could hear, "might I perform a song for you and Lady Stark?" Cregan turned to him, surprise evident in the slight raising of his bushy eyebrows. "A song, Rickon?" "I have been practicing," Rickon added, his silver-grey eyes meeting his father's darker ones. "With Aunt Sara's guidance." Something passed across his father's face then, an emotion Rickon couldn't quite name. After a moment's consideration, Cregan nodded. "Very well, son." A hush fell over the hall as Rickon rose from his seat, all eyes turning toward the small figure of the Stark heir. He moved to stand before the high table, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. He took a deep breath, centering himself as Aunt Sara had taught him, and began to sing. His voice, high and clear as a mountain stream, filled the great hall with unexpected sweetness. The song was an old northern ballad of love and loyalty, of a warrior who returned from battle to find his beloved waiting faithful through the long winter. The melody wove through the smoky air of the hall, touching something ancient in the stones themselves. Rickon's young voice carried emotion beyond his years, each note pure and true. As he sang of winter's end and spring's promise, he saw his father's expression transform, the stern lines of his face softening into something vulnerable and unguarded. When the final note faded into silence, the hall remained still for a heartbeat before erupting into appreciative murmurs and applause. Rickon's cheeks flushed with pride as he bowed, first to his father and Lady Alys-Anne, then to the assembled guests. "Well done, little wolf," Lady Alys-Anne said as he returned to his seat, her voice carrying a warmth he hadn't heard before. "You have a gift." His father said nothing, but placed a heavy hand on Rickon's shoulder, squeezing gently. That silent gesture spoke volumes, conveying more than any words could have expressed. Later, as the evening drew on and the younger children were escorted to their beds, Rickon lingered, watching the changing dynamics of the feast. The formality of earlier hours had given way to something looser, more genuine. Northern lords now mingled with Lady Alys-Anne's southern retainers, sharing stories and comparing martial skills with the easy camaraderie that wine often fostered. A raucous noise erupted from the lower tables. Lord Baron Umber rose to his full, imposing height, his massive frame swaying slightly with the evening's indulgences, his voice thundering across the hall like a storm breaking over the wall. "My lords and ladies! The hour grows late, and our lord has a new bride waiting." His enormous fist pounded the wooden table, sending cups jumping and wine sloshing. "Time for the bedding." The hall erupted into cheers and howls, benches scraping against stone as men and women leapt to their feet. Rickon's eyes widened as he watched the transformation come over his father's face, the stern lord of Winterfell suddenly broke into wild, uninhibited laughter, his head thrown back, teeth flashing through his thick beard. In one fluid motion that belied his size, Cregan vaulted over the high table and swept Lady Lykaon into his arms. She let out a startled gasp that melted into laughter, her dark hair tumbling down as her carefully arranged braids came undone. For a brief moment, Rickon glimpsed something he had never seen before, his father's eyes alive with boyish mischief, the weight of lordship temporarily cast aside. "If you want a proper bedding, you'll have to catch us!" Cregan roared, and then he was moving, his long legs carrying him and his bride through the hall with remarkable speed, her skirts billowing behind them as they fled toward the stairs. The crowd surged after them like a wave breaking against the shore, ladies reaching for Lord Stark while men pursued Lady Lykaon with good-natured jests. Rickon found himself pressed against the wall as the revelers streamed past, their faces flushed with wine and excitement. "What's happening?" he asked, tugging at Aunt Sara's sleeve as she appeared beside him, her eyes dancing with amusement. "The bedding ceremony, little wolf," she explained, keeping her voice low. "An old tradition. The men will escort your father's bride to the marriage bed, removing her garments along the way, while the women do the same to your father. It's meant to bring luck to the marriage." Rickon watched as the last of the crowd disappeared up the spiral staircase, their body songs echoing down the stone corridor. The great hall felt suddenly empty, abandoned cups and half-eaten food scattered across the tables. Only the oldest lords remained seated, too dignified or too weary to participate in the raucous tradition. "Come," Aunt Sara said, gently guiding him toward the exit. "This part of the celebration is not for children's eyes. It's time you were abed as well." As they walked the quiet corridors toward his chambers, Rickon could still hear distant laughter and singing from above, the sounds growing fainter with each step. Something strange stirred in his chest, a mixture of happiness for his father and an unnamed melancholy. The world was changing around him, shifting like the shadows cast by the torches against Winterfell's ancient stones. In his chamber, as Aunt Sara helped him prepare for bed, he gazed out the narrow window at the godswood beyond. The heart tree would be standing sentinel in the darkness, its red leaves rustling with secrets. He thought of the blood that had been pressed against its bark that morning, his father's and Lady Lysand's mingled together, absorbed by the ancient wood. "Will things be different now?" he asked as Aunt Sara tucked the furs around him. She paused, considering his question with the seriousness it deserved. "Some things will change, yes. Lady Lykaon will bring new customs, new ideas. But the important things, your father's love for you, your place here at Winterfell, those remain as solid as these walls." Rickon nodded, though uncertainty lingered in his mind. He had seen how his father looked at Lady Lykaon, a softness in his eyes that Rickon had rarely witnessed before. Would there be room in his father's heart for both of them? Hope you enjoyed the chapter. If you want to see images of Lykaon Blackwood, Cregan Stark, and Rickon Stark, please head on over to my Patreon. If you're enjoying the story and want to read one advanced chapter ahead of their public release, then please head over to my Patreon. patreon.com/darkebones. Chapter 4, Chapter 3, The Awakening, 3. Rickon slipped away after breaking his fast, while Aunt Sara spoke with the steward about household matters. No one noticed when he took the small path that wound behind the kitchens, his small boots leaving shallow impressions in the damp soil. The morning air bit at his cheeks, but Rickon didn't mind. The cold was a friend in Winterfell. 3 days had passed since father had stood before the heart tree with Lady Lykaon. Rickon remembered the ceremony, the way the torchlight had caught in her dark hair, how his father's solemn face had softened when he draped his cloak around her shoulders. There had been feasting afterward, music and laughter that echoed through the great hall until Aunt Sara had taken him to bed. He hadn't seen much of either of them since. "They're getting to know each other, sweetling," Aunt Sara had told him yesterday, her fingers gentle as she'd combed his hair. Her eyes had held something Rickon couldn't name, something that looked sad. That's what new husbands and wives must do. Rickon understood, or thought he did. It was like when he met a new horse in the stables. You had to approach slowly, speak softly, let them smell your hand before you touched them. Perhaps it was the same with new wives. The godswood welcomed him with its familiar silence. Here, among the sentinel trees and ancient oaks, Rickon felt most himself. The strange thoughts that sometimes filled his head seemed less frightening beneath the red leaves of the heart tree. Gravity. The word had come to him yesterday while watching a leaf fall from a tree. Astronomy. That one appeared when Maester Kennett showed him how to use the astrolabe. Words that tasted foreign on his tongue, yet settled in his mind like they belonged there. Maester Kennett had praised him for solving his sums so quickly. A sharp mind, young lord, he'd said, eyebrows raised in surprise. Like your father's. But Rickon, the numbers simply arranged themselves in his mind, falling into patterns as obvious as the constellations in a clear night sky. He settled at the base of the heart tree, his back against its white bark. Above him, red leaves rustled, whispering secrets he couldn't quite catch. Rickon closed his eyes and imagined himself soaring above Winterfell, higher than the ravens, higher than the clouds, looking down at the castle that grew smaller and smaller until it was just a speck in the vastness of the north. Why is your face so serious, little lord? The voice startled him. Rickon's eyes flew open to find Lady Alysanne standing before him, her lips curved in a smile. She looked different from the solemn bride who had stood beside his father. Her hair was loosely braided rather than elaborately arranged, and wore riding elathers and red tunic. Nothing at all like the gowns he had seen her in. My father's new wife, his mind whispered, the words strange and uncertain. She stood with her hands on her hips, head tilted slightly as she regarded him. There was a brightness to her that Rickon hadn't noticed before, as if some inner light had been kindled during the days she'd spent hidden away with father. Rickon pulled his knees closer to his chest, suddenly shy under her gaze. The heart tree loomed protectively at his back, its carved face watching over them both. I wasn't being serious, he said finally, his voice small against the vastness of the ancient grove. I was thinking about flying. Alysanne lowered herself beside him with a grace that reminded Rickon of a swan settling on water. Flying. She tilted her head, studying him with interest rather than the indulgent amusement adults often showed when children spoke of impossible things. Above the clouds or just among the treetops? The question caught him off guard. Adults rarely engaged with such fancies. Above everything, Rickon admitted. Until Winterfell becomes smaller than my hand. He demonstrated, pinching his fingers together as if to capture the castle between them. Alysanne nodded as though this made perfect sense. I used to imagine the same at Raventree Hall. I'd picture myself as one of the ravens, soaring above the weirwood, watching my brothers grow smaller until they were no bigger than ants. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the rustling leaves overhead. Rickon examined her from the corner of his eye. The guarded knees that had marked her features during her arrival had melted away. Here, beneath the heart tree, she seemed different, younger somehow, less guarded. Do you like Winterfell? He asked suddenly. It's different from home, she replied, running her fingers through the soft moss. Colder, of course. Sterner in some ways. But there's strength in these walls that I admire. She looked up at the canopy of red leaves above them. And beauty, too, though it's not always easy to see at first glance. Rickon nodded, understanding precisely what she meant. Winterfell revealed itself slowly, like a secret shared in whispers. The other children used to say Northerners were savages, she continued, her voice lowering conspiratorially. But my father always told me the Starks were different, that they remembered things other houses had forgotten. Something stirred in Rickon's mind at her words, a half-formed thought, a fragment of knowledge just beyond his grasp. He frowned, trying to capture it, but it slipped away like mist. What things? He asked. Alysanne grinned. That's what I hope to learn, little lord. She reached out hesitantly, then gently tucked a strand of dark hair behind his ear. Perhaps we could discover those secrets together. The gesture was so unexpected that Rickon momentarily froze. Aunt Sara was the only one who touched him with such casual affection. Yet there was something in Alisanne's eyes, a genuine warmth that made him think she wasn't simply playing at being motherly for appearance's sake. I know I'm not replacing anyone, she said softly, as if reading his thoughts. Your mother, or your Aunt Sara. But I hope we might be friends, at least. The word friends hung in the air between them, an offering without demands. Rickon felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. I'd like that, he said, surprising himself with the truth of it. Alisanne's eyes lit up suddenly. Do you know what I was doing before I came to find you? She rose to her feet in one fluid motion, extending her hand. Come, I'll show you. Curious, Rickon took her offered hand and followed her through the God's Wood. They emerged near the archery range where several targets had been set up against hay bales. A finely crafted bow leaned against a wooden post, alongside a quiver of arrows fletched with raven feathers. My father insisted all his children learn to defend themselves, Alisanne said, picking up the bow with practiced ease. The bow was always my favorite. She knocked an arrow, drew back with perfect form, and released. The arrow whistled through the air, striking the center of the target with a solid thunk. 2 more arrows followed in quick succession, each finding its mark with unerring precision. Would you like to try? She asked, her eyes dancing with mischief and delight. I could teach you, if you wish. Rickon's heart leapt. He had watched Sir Hallis training the older boys from the shadows of the armory, imagining himself among them. His small hands itched to hold the bow. Yes, he exclaimed, then remembered his manners. Please, my lady. I've asked Sir Hallis many times, but he says I must wait until I'm older. The words tumbled out in his excitement, his formal reserve forgotten. Nonsense, Alisanne scoffed, selecting a smaller bow that had been lying nearby. I was no taller than you when I first learned. The secret isn't in strength but in patience and precision, qualities you seem to possess in abundance, little lord. She knelt beside him, adjusting his stance with gentle hands. Stand sideways to the target, feet shoulder width apart. Good. Now, hold the bow like this, not too tight. The bow is an extension of yourself, not an enemy to be conquered. Rickon followed her instructions, his brow furrowed in concentration. The bow felt awkward in his grasp, too large despite being the smallest available. When she helped him draw back the string, his arms trembled with the effort. Breathe, she murmured. Find the rhythm between heartbeats. That's when you release. His first arrow fell short of the target, landing pathetically in the dirt. The second veered wildly to the left. Frustration heated his cheeks, but Alisanne's patient smile never wavered. My first 100 arrows never found their mark, she confided. My brothers laughed until my father silenced them. The wolf's teeth grow slowly, he told them, but once they emerge, they never dull. Something about her words resonated within Rickon. He squared his shoulders and accepted another arrow. This time, he took a deep breath, finding that quiet place within himself where numbers arranged themselves in perfect order. The world narrowed to the target, the bow, the tension in the string. The arrow flew true, striking the outer edge of the target. Not the center, not even close, but it had hit. Pride surged through him, bright and fierce. Well done. Alisanne clapped her hands together. A natural talent, just as I suspected. A shadow passed over them, and Rickon looked up to see his father approaching, his face unreadable as always. For a moment, fear flickered in Rickon's chest. Was he in trouble? Had he overstepped by handling weapons without permission? But Lord Stark's eyes softened as he observed them, the faintest smile touching his lips. Teaching my son your Blackwood skills already, my lady. Someone must, Alisanne replied, a teasing lilt to her voice that Rickon had never heard anyone use with his father. "Unless you wish him to wait until his arms are too stiff to learn properly." To Rickon's amazement, his father laughed, a short, rusty sound, as if unused to the exercise. "My wife makes a fair point, Rickon. Perhaps it's time we began your training in earnest." The words "my wife" still sounded strange to Rickon's ears, but less jarring than before. He watched as his father's hand briefly touched Alysanne's shoulder, a gesture so quick he might have imagined it. "Show me again," Lord Stark said, his voice gentler than Rickon could remember hearing it in many moons. "Let me see what my son has learned from the finest archer in the Riverlands." Rickon stood straighter, determined not to disappoint either of them. As he knocked another arrow under Alysanne's watchful guidance, a curious warmth spread through his chest, not quite happiness, but something adjacent to it. Something that felt, unexpectedly, like the first fragile seedling of hope. The days that followed brought a change to Winterfell as subtle as the first breath of spring after a long winter. Alysanne sought him out each morning after his lessons with Maester Kennet, sometimes for archery practice, other times simply to walk the grounds and listen to his knowledge of Winterfell's history. Rickon found himself looking forward to these moments, storing away observations to share with her, the way the light struck the glass gardens at midday, or how the shadows moved across the first keep. One crisp morning, as frost crunched beneath their boots in the courtyard, Alysanne appeared wearing her riding leathers and a mischievous smile. "Have you ever ridden a proper horse, little lord?" she asked, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Not a pony, mind you, but a true courser." Rickon shook his head, eyes widening. Father had promised he would have a proper mount when he turned 6, still nearly 2 years away. "Then today's the day," Alysanne declared. "Frost is gentle enough, but spirited when given her head." She gestured toward the stables where a groom was leading out a dappled grey mare with intelligent eyes. "What say you? Shall we see the north as horses do?" His heart pounded with excitement as she lifted him onto the saddle before swinging up behind him. Her arms encircled him securely as she took the reins, and Rickon felt strangely safe despite sitting higher than he'd ever been. "Hold the pommel just so," she instructed, guiding his small hands. "Feel how she breathes beneath you? That's the secret, you must become one with the horse." They started slowly, circling the yard as Rickon adjusted to the mare's movements. Then, with a nod from Jord the stable master who was watching them with an approving eye, Alysanne guided Frost through the Hunter's Gate and out onto the open fields beyond Winterfell's walls. "Ready," she whispered in his ear. Before he could answer, she clicked her tongue and Frost leapt forward. The world blurred around them as they galloped across the frosted meadows, Rickon's laughter torn away by the wind. Alysanne's arms remained steady around him, but she gave him the illusion of freedom, of flight. They rode for what seemed like hours, following the curve of a stream, racing shadows cast by passing clouds. When they finally slowed to rest atop a small rise overlooking Winterfell, Rickon's cheeks were flushed with cold and excitement. "You ride well for a first-timer," Alysanne said, helping him dismount. "You have a natural seat, a little wolf on horseback." Pride bloomed in his chest at her words. They sat together on a fallen log, sharing a skin of warm spiced cider she'd brought in her saddlebag. Frost grazed nearby, occasionally lifting her head to watch them with curious eyes. "Father says I'm too small yet for a proper horse," Rickon admitted, warming his hands around the leather skin. "Your father is cautious, and rightly so," Alysanne replied. "But sometimes we must take measured risks to grow. I'll speak with him, perhaps we can begin proper riding lessons alongside your archery." The promise in her words made him feel taller somehow, more substantial. As they rode back to Winterfell at a gentler pace, Rickon found himself studying her profile against the winter sky, trying to reconcile this laughing, wind-tossed woman with the solemn lady who had arrived at Winterfell less than a fortnight ago. When they returned, Aunt Sara was waiting in the courtyard, her brow furrowed with concern that melted into relief at the sight of Rickon's beaming face. Rickon noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes assessed Alice-Anne with guarded wariness. "We've had quite the adventure," Alice-Anne said as she lifted Rickon down. "Your nephew has the makings of a fine horseman." "I rode a real horse, Aunt Sara," Rickon exclaimed. "We went faster than the wind." Something complicated passed across Aunt Sara's features, pride mingled with a flash of something that might have been loss. She smoothed his wind-blown hair with a gentle hand. "Did you indeed? And did Lady Stark ensure you didn't fall off this real horse?" The question held a note of challenge beneath its lightness. "I would sooner cut off my own hand than let harm come to him," Alice-Anne replied, her voice soft but firm. Her eyes met Sara's, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Later that evening, Rickon paused outside the small solar where Aunt Sara often spent her evenings sewing by the fire. The door stood slightly ajar, and through the gap, he could see Alice-Anne seated across from his aunt, their heads bent close in conversation. "Fear I've overstepped," Alice-Anne was saying, her fingers twisting in her lap. "It was not my intention to usurp your place in his affections." Aunt Sara's laugh held a trace of bitterness. "You are his father's wife. I am merely the bastard sister, tolerated out of duty. Is that truly what you believe?" Alice-Anne leaned forward, clasping Sara's hands in her own. "My husband considers you his sister, and that makes you mine as well. Rickon adores you, anyone with eyes can see it. You have been his mother in all but name." Silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken fears and hopes. Rickon held his breath, sensing the importance of this moment though he couldn't fully understand it. "I never thought I'd say this." Sara's voice grew thick with emotion. "But I'm glad he has you." Her hands trembled in Alice-Anne's grasp. "When Cregan brought you home, I feared, well, I feared many things. That you'd find me uncouth. That you'd want me gone. That Rickon would love me more." Alice-Anne finished gently. "A child's heart isn't a cup with limited measure, Sara. It expands to hold all who truly care for him." Rickon leaned closer, his small fingers pressing against the worn wood of the door frame. Something warm and unfamiliar bloomed in his chest. "He needs us both," Alice-Anne continued. "You know the boy's heart as I never could. You've shaped him into the thoughtful child he is. And I..." She paused, searching for words. "I can teach him things he might need for the world beyond Winterfell." Sara wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "He's special, isn't he? Not just because he's Cregan's heir. There's something in him." The floorboard beneath Rickon's foot creaked, loud as thunder in the quiet corridor. Both women turned toward the door. "Rickon!" Sara called. "Is that you, sweetling?" He considered fleeing, but his feet seemed rooted to the spot. The door swung wider, revealing him in his nightclothes, small and suddenly uncertain. "How long have you been standing there?" Alice-Anne asked, gently smiling. "Not long," he lied, then immediately felt guilty for the deception. "I couldn't sleep." Aunt Sara opened her arms, and he went to her, burying his face against her shoulder as he had done since he was small. Her familiar scent of lavender enveloped him. "What troubles you, little wolf?" she asked, stroking his hair. Rickon hesitated, weighing his words carefully as the shadows lengthened across the chamber. The question that had been gnawing at him all evening finally escaped his lips. "Were you and Lady Alice-Anne fighting?" "About me." Sara's hand paused in his hair, then resumed its gentle stroking. Her chest rose and fell with a deep breath beneath his cheek. "No, little wolf. Not fighting." Her voice was soft, measured. "Sometimes grown people have different ideas about what's best. That doesn't mean we're fighting." Rickon frowned, unconvinced. "Will you sing to me?" he asked instead, seeking comfort in the familiar. Sara smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "Of course. Which song would you like?" "Jenny's song," he replied without hesitation. It was an old melody, haunting and sweet, that always seemed to quiet the strange whispers in his mind. Sara shifted, settling Rickon more comfortably against her as she began to hum the opening notes. Her voice, though untrained, carried a natural warmth that filled the chamber. High in the halls of the kings who are gone, Jenny would dance with her ghosts. She sang softly, her fingers continuing their rhythmic movement through his hair. As the melody wove around them, Rickon felt the day's worries begin to loosen their grip. "Why did she stay with the ghosts?" he murmured, his eyelids growing heavy. "Wasn't she afraid?" Sara paused in her singing. "I think sometimes memories can be as precious as they are painful," she answered thoughtfully. And perhaps Jenny found something with her ghosts that she couldn't find elsewhere. "Like belonging," Rickon said, the word slipping out unbidden, laden with meaning beyond his years. Something flickered across Sara's face, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "Yes, like belonging," she agreed, and resumed the song. As she continued through the verses, Rickon's thoughts grew hazy. The melody seemed to shimmer in the air around them, mingling with the shadows cast by the dying fire. The song spoke of loss and remembrance, of dancing through seasons until walls crumbled to dust, and somewhere in his drowsy mind, Rickon wondered if the walls of Winterfell would one day fall as well. His eyes grew too heavy to keep open, and the last thing he was aware of was Sara's voice, gentle yet somehow sorrowful, singing of Jenny who never wanted to leave. In that space between wakefulness and dreams, Rickon thought he heard another voice join Aunt Sara's, a man's voice, deep and resonant, singing from somewhere far away. But before he could grasp at the sound, sleep claimed him fully, and he sank into darkness cradled by the song's melancholic embrace. ___. Hope you enjoyed the chapter. Please check my profile out for my other fanfic, A Dragon's Song, Laner Velaryon Si, AZOFX High School DxD. If you're enjoying the story and want to read one advanced chapter ahead of their public release, then please head over to my Patreon. patreon.com/darkebones. Chapter 5, Chapter 4, The Awakening, 4. Late 132 AC. The snow fell softly beyond the window, blanketing Winterfell in a familiar white shroud. Cregan watched it gather on the courtyard stones, accumulating in the corners where the wind couldn't reach. His eyes returned to his son below, studying the boy's movements with quiet pride. The winter sun cast long shadows across the training yard, where his son continued his drills with unwavering focus under the attention of Master Hallis. Though the boy was only 4 name days, he had been given permission to start learning the sword. "Lord Stark," Maester Kenneth said, breaking the silence. "There is more news from King's Landing that requires your attention." Cregan nodded, reluctantly turning away from the window. The fire in the hearth crackled as he settled into the chair behind his desk, his shadow stretching long across the floor. "What else does Lord Manderley report?" he asked, reaching for the scroll. "The King's regents quarrel amongst themselves like crows over carrion," Kenneth replied, his chain links clinking softly as he shifted. "With Lord Velaryon having passed, there is talk that Lord Onwinpeak seeks to position his daughter as a potential bride for the king. The king himself has stated that Gamon Palehair is to be his heir." Cregan's mouth tightened. Peak has always reached beyond his grasp. The realm still bleeds from the dance, and already the vultures circle. "And what of this pale-hair boy? What do we know of him?" Cregan asked, running a weathered thumb along the edge of the parchment. Kenneth's spectacles caught the firelight as he tilted his head. "Very little, my lord. He is said to be of Lysane descent, his mother a cousin to the late Queen Lara Rogaray. The boy is but 7 name days old, scarcely older than your own son." Cregan considered this. Children on thrones rarely boded well for the realm. He had seen enough bloodshed in the name of succession to last several lifetimes. "Aegon III," Cregan murmured, more to himself than to his maester. The name itself carried weight, a reminder of how close the Targaryen dynasty had come to extinction. The boy who watched dragons die. The broken child who had seen his mother devoured before his eyes. Cregan had met him briefly during his time in King's Landing, a hollow-eyed child with none of the fire that had made his ancestors formidable. The boy barely spoke, flinched at sudden movements, and seemed to shrink within himself when addressed directly. A king in name only, surrounded by ambitious men who saw only opportunity in his trauma. They say he still refuses to sit the Iron Throne, Cregan said, the memory of the twisted metal monstrosity rising unbidden in his mind. Prefers a wooden chair beside it instead. A prudent choice, perhaps, Kenneth offered. The throne has drawn enough blood. Cregan grunted in agreement. He had never coveted that seat of swords, not even when he'd held the power to claim it for himself. For 6 days, he had been Hand of the King, long enough to dispense the justice that honor demanded, then return to the north where he belonged. Others might have lingered, might have used that power to reshape the realm according to their ambitions. But the south was a viper's nest that had nearly consumed itself. The Targaryen dynasty hung by a thread as thin as the boy king's wrist. We northerners remember what the rest of the realm seems eager to forget, Cregan said, rising to pace before the hearth. The heat of the flames did little to warm the chill that settled in his bones whenever he thought of the dance. Winter came for House Targaryen, and nearly took them all. Brothers killing brothers. Sisters killing sisters. Dragons falling from the sky like burning stars. He paused, watching the flames dance. Fire and blood, the Targaryen words. They had brought both to Westeros in abundance. And now they place their hopes on a frightened child who cannot bear to hear a dragon mentioned in his presence. Cregan shook his head. The realm will bleed again before that boy comes of age. Through the window, he caught sight of his son again. Rickon had taken a tumble in the snow but was already rising, brushing himself off with determined little hands before retrieving his wooden practice sword. The sight stirred something in Cregan's chest, pride, yes, but also apprehension. What world would his son inherit? What wars would he be forced to fight because of southern follies? The boy was quick to learn though, Cregan noted with satisfaction. Not just with a sword, but in matters of the mind as well. Rickon's tutoring had begun earlier than most, at Maester Kenneth's insistence. What of my son's other studies? Cregan asked, turning from the window. How does he fare with his letters and numbers? The change in subject seemed to transform Kenneth, his scholarly demeanor brightening like a candle given fresh air. The maester straightened, chain links jingling with the sudden movement. Young Rickon is. Kenneth paused, searching for the proper words. In all my years at the Citadel and serving House Stark, I have never encountered a mind quite like his, my lord. Cregan raised an eyebrow. Kenneth was not given to exaggeration. At 4 name days, he reads as well as boys thrice his age, the maester continued, his thin hands animated now. He devours texts meant for much older students. Last week, I found him with a volume of Valyrian histories, sounding out the words to himself. And his figures? Cregan asked, a flicker of pride warming his chest despite his attempt at stoicism. Remarkable, Kenneth breathed. We've moved well beyond simple counting and basic sums. The boy grasps concepts I wouldn't normally introduce until a child's 10th name day. I've begun teaching him principles of geometry that are typically reserved for acolytes at the Citadel. Cregan's brow furrowed. You don't find this unnatural? The maester hesitated, adjusting his spectacles. Different, certainly. Exceptional, without doubt. But children of unusual gifts appear throughout history, my lord. Cregan turned back to the window, watching his son parry a slow, deliberate strike from Master Hallis. And what does he say of these lessons? Cregan asked, his voice softer now. He asks questions I sometimes struggle to answer, Kenneth admitted. Yesterday, he inquired about the principles behind the changing of seasons. Not merely the fact that summer follows spring, but why such changes occur. He speaks of the heavens and stars as if they follow patterns we might decode, given time and proper observation. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the hearth. Keep these observations between us, Cregan decided finally. The boy will have enough burdens without rumors of unnatural talents. Of course, my lord, Kenneth nodded solemnly. And his dreams? Cregan asked suddenly. Has he spoken more of them? The maester's expression grew troubled. Less frequently than before. Though 3 nights passed, he woke screaming about wolves with burning eyes. Cregan's jaw tightened. The old gods spoke through dreams sometimes, especially to those of Stark blood. What they might be telling his son, he could not guess. Before Cregan could respond, a raven fluttered through the open window, wings beating frantically against the cold air. It landed on the desk with a soft thud, snow melting on its black feathers. The bird fixed them with a beady eye, extending its leg to reveal a small scroll tied with grey ribbon. Maester Kenneth moved quickly to untie it, his fingers working the knot with practiced ease. The raven, freed of its burden, hopped to the window ledge and settled there, as if awaiting a response. Cregan watched as the maester's eyes scanned the parchment. The old man's face, already pale from years spent indoors poring over tomes and scrolls, drained of what little color it possessed. The maester's hands trembled slightly, causing the parchment to rustle in the silence. What is the matter? Cregan asked, straightening in his chair, a familiar weight of dread settling in his stomach. Kenneth swallowed hard before meeting his lord's gaze. Grim tidings from Lord Manderley, my lord. There are rumors of winter fever spreading through White Harbor. Cregan's jaw clenched. Winter fever. The words alone were enough to chill the blood of any Northman. The disease moved swiftly through crowded quarters, striking down the young and old alike with merciless efficiency. The last outbreak, during his grandfather's time, had claimed nearly a third of Winterfell's household. How widespread? He demanded, rising from his seat. The letter is dated 2 days past, Kenneth replied, still studying the parchment. Lord Manderley reports 36 confirmed cases in the harbour district, with new cases appearing daily. He has ordered the affected areas quarantined, but fears the contagion may have already spread beyond containment. White Harbor is the North's gateway to the world, he said, his breath fogging the glass. Ships from Bravos, Pentos, even as far as Yeti dock at her wharves. If the fever takes hold there, it could spread throughout the north with the spring trade, Kenneth finished grimly. Lord Manderley requests guidance on whether to close the port entirely. Cregan rubbed his beard, mind racing through calculations of food stores and winter reserves. Closing White Harbor would strangle the North's already tenuous trade, but allowing ships to continue their routes risked carrying the fever to every corner of his domain. What remedies do we have? He asked. Kenneth hesitated. Few that are proven effective, my lord. Willow bark tea offers some relief from the fever. Mustard poultices for the chest congestion. But once the bloody cough begins. The maester trailed off, the unspoken truth hanging between them. Send ravens to every holdfast and keep, Cregan commanded. Any sign of fever is to be reported immediately. Instruct the maesters to prepare what remedies they can. He turned from the window, decision made. Tell Lord Manderley to close the harbour to all incoming vessels. Those already docked must remain quarantined for a fortnight before any crew may disembark. Any ship seeking to leave must submit its crew to examination by the maesters. And what of Winterfell, my lord? Kenneth asked. Shall we close the gates? Cregan's eyes drifted back to his son in the courtyard below. Not yet. But double the guards at the Hunter's Gate and the East Gate. No travellers from the east are to enter without close scrutiny. He moved to the hearth, staring into the flames as if they might offer counsel. The North had endured long winters, wars, and worse. It would survive this too, though not without cost. The question that gnawed at him was how high that cost would be. Have Maester Walton prepare the winter stores inventory, he added. If we must isolate Winterfell, I would know exactly how long we can sustain ourselves." The raven on the windowsill cawed softly, reminding them of its presence. Cregan nodded to Kennet. "Send our reply to Lord Manderley. Tell him the Starks stand with White Harbour, as always." As Kennet prepared parchment and ink, Cregan's thoughts turned to the crypts beneath Winterfell, where generations of Starks watched with stone eyes. How many had faced similar trials? How many had made decisions that determined who would live and who would die? Outside, the snow continued to fall, indifferent to the troubles of men. Records of Archmaester Miles, 170 AC. Of the various calamities to befall the Seven Kingdoms during the reign of Aegon III, none matched the lethality of the winter fever. This contagion, the most devastating since the era of the Shivers, first manifested in late 132 AC upon the Three Sisters, where it extinguished half the lives in Sisterden. In a fit of misplaced vengeance, the survivors blamed Ibini's whaling crews for the blight, leading to a localized massacre of all Ibini's found on the islands. The sickness soon spanned the waters of the Bight to White Harbour, claiming the lives of both Lord Desmond Manderley and his heir, Medric. This loss compelled Sir Torrin Manderley to resign his position on the Council of Regents in the capital to secure his family's seat in the north. From these northern hubs, the fever drifted south like a cold mist, choking the major ports of the eastern seaboard, Gulltown, Maidenpool, and Duskendale, in rapid succession, even as concurrent reports confirmed the plague had reached the free city of Bravos. Hope you enjoyed the chapter. Extra long chapter coming up next, and maybe little Rickon might just get a companion XD. If you want to see images of Alys Ann Blackwood, Cregan Stark, and Rickon Stark, please head on over to my Patreon. If you're enjoying the story and want to read one advance chapter ahead of their public release, then please head over to my Patreon. patreon.com/darkebones. Chapter 6, Chapter 5, The Awakening, v. The scent of pine needles and weirwood sap filled the godswood as Rickon knelt before the heart tree, his small fingers tracing patterns in the frost-rimmed moss. He was 6 name days now, though the celebration had been a subdued affair, a private meal with Aunt Sara, Alys Ann, and his father, and a quiet prayer before the old gods. The face carved into the weirwood seemed to watch him with knowing eyes, bleeding sap like slow tears for what was coming. Winterfell had descended into whispers and fear. The winter fever, as Rickon had learnt that it was called, was a merciless illness. The first sign of the winter fever was a red flush of the face, followed by a fever which would grow progressively worse as time passed. Although cooling the diseased person down with snow and icy water appeared to slow the course of the fever, it was unable to halt it entirely. By the second day, those afflicted would start to shiver violently and complain of being cold, in spite of their fever. By the third day, they became delirious, and would begin to sweat. On the fourth day, either the fever would break and the victim would recover, or the victim would die. Winterfell had been quarantined. No ravens flew in or out. No travelers passed through the gates. Even the small folk who normally brought their goods to market had been turned away, leaving the castle to subsist on what stores remained from autumn's harvest. Rickon's breath formed small clouds in the cold air as he pressed his palm against the pale bark of the heart tree. The rough texture caught against his skin, familiar and comforting. The old gods were silent, offering neither comfort nor warning. Rickon sometimes wondered if they heard prayers at all. The whispers had reached him days ago, even before his father had made the official proclamation. The winter fever had leapt beyond the north's borders. King's Landing, that festering cesspit of humanity, now burned with the same fever that threatened Winterfell. Maester Kennet had spoken in low voices with Lord Cregan, but Rickon's keen ears had caught fragments. On the third day of the new year, 133 AC, the first cases appeared in Flea Bottom. By the seventh day, the fever had reached the Red Keep itself. Now, they said, bodies were stacked like cordwood in the streets of the capital, with too few septons to perform the rites and too little space to bury the dead. Rickon. The voice cut through the stillness of the godswood. Aunt Sara stood at the edge of the clearing, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. She had wrapped herself in thick furs, her dark braid peeking out from beneath a woolen cap. "The maester is waiting. It's time for your lesson today." The walk through Winterfell's grounds revealed a castle holding its breath. Servants hurried between buildings with cloths pressed to their faces. Guards stood at their posts with wary eyes, watching for any sign of the telltale flush. In the training yard, where normally the clash of steel would ring out, silence reigned. Lord Cregan had ordered all unnecessary gatherings suspended until the fever passed, or claimed them all. "Maester Kennet has been brewing potions since dawn," Sara said, her voice low as they crossed the courtyard. "Something with willow bark and honey. Says it might help with the fever, though he won't promise more." Rickon nodded. "The old texts speak of plagues that swept through the 7 kingdoms before. Some lasted years." He did not mention the fragmented memories that sometimes surfaced in his dreams, of cities emptied by disease, of pyres burning day and night, of words that made no sense to him like germs and bacteria. The maester's tower smelled of herbs and smoke, of ancient parchment and freshly melted wax. Kennet himself stood hunched over his workbench, his chains clinking softly as he measured powders into small cloth packets. "Ah, young lord," Maester Kennet said without looking up, his weathered fingers nimbly tying off a small sachet. "Right on time. Winter fever waits for no man, and neither should our lessons." Rickon approached the workbench, standing on tiptoe to see the various herbs and powders arranged in neat piles. The underlying hint of something acrid and medicinal made his nose wrinkle. "What are these for?" Rickon asked, pointing to the little packets. Kennet straightened with a soft groan, his chain links clinking against each other. "Willow bark for the fever, honey to soothe the throat, and a pinch of valerian to help the afflicted sleep. Not a cure, mind you, but it may ease the suffering." He gestured to a chair beside his desk. "Sit, Rickon. Today's lesson is rather more practical than our usual studies." Aunt Sara lingered by the door. "I'll return in an hour, then," she said, eyes meeting Rickon's briefly before she departed. The maester shuffled to a shelf and pulled down a large, leather-bound tome. Its spine cracked as he opened it on the desk between them. The pages were yellowed with age, covered in cramped writing and occasional diagrams of the human body. "The winter fever," Kennet began, his voice taking on the measured cadence he used for formal instruction, "has visited the north many times throughout our history. The maesters of old recorded each outbreak, tracking its path and toll." His finger traced along a timeline drawn on one of the pages. "The last one in 39 AC was particularly severe, claiming nearly a third of Winterfell's population." Rickon studied the diagrams. "How did they stop it?" "Stop it?" Kennet's eyebrows rose above his spectacles. "Nature stopped it, my lord. Like all fevers, it burned until it found no more fuel." He paused, considering the boy before him. Though there were measures taken that seemed to slow its spread. The maester turned the page to reveal a map of Winterfell from decades past, with certain areas marked in red ink. "Isolation," he continued. "Keeping the sick apart from the healthy. Your father has already begun this practice, quarantining those showing symptoms in the eastern section of Wintertown. Rickon nodded. He'd seen the guards posted there, their faces grim. "Cleanliness, too," Kennet added. "Washing hands with lye soap, boiling linens used by the sick, burning the clothes of the dead." He glanced at Rickon, perhaps wondering if such talk was too harsh for a child of 6, but continued when he saw the boy's steady gaze. "And the most controversial measure, fire." "Yes. When the fever reached Wintertown in 59 AC, Lord Brandon Stark ordered parts of the city burned. Entire neighborhoods reduced to ash." Kennet's voice lowered. "Some called him cruel, but fewer died there than in other places." The implications hung in the air between them. Rickon thought of the crowded streets of Wintertown, the families huddled together for warmth. "Your father faces difficult choices in the days ahead," Kennet said, closing the book. As will you, someday. A lord must weigh the suffering of the few against the survival of the many. Rickon felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air seeping through the tower stones. Is there nothing else we can do? Kennet's eyes softened behind his thick lenses. We can learn, my lord. Observe. Record what works and what fails, so those who come after us might be better prepared. He pulled a blank parchment toward him. Now, help me calculate how much willow bark we'll need in the coming month. As Rickon worked through the grim arithmetic, counting potential lives like sums in a ledger, his mind wandered to the fragments of knowledge that sometimes surfaced in his dreams, strange words and concepts that came to him without prompting. Quarantine. Antibiotics. Vaccines. Perhaps there was more he could do than simply wait for the fever to burn itself out. Maester, he said suddenly, interrupting their calculations, what if we could see what causes the fever? Not just treat the symptoms, but understand why people fall ill in the first place. Kennet paused, quill hovering over parchment. An interesting question, young lord. The Citadel has debated the causes of disease for centuries. Some believe in miasmas, bad air. Others in an imbalance of humors within the body. But what if it's something smaller? Rickon pressed, struggling to articulate concepts he didn't fully understand himself. Something too small to see with our eyes alone. The maester's gaze sharpened with interest. Like the animalcules Archmaester Emerio claimed to see in pond water through his magnifying lenses. He stroked his beard thoughtfully. A bold theory, though difficult to prove without better tools than we possess. Rickon felt a familiar frustration building, knowing things he couldn't explain, couldn't prove, couldn't implement with the resources at hand, and more importantly not even understanding where this information came from, why he even knew these concepts. But before he could respond, a commotion erupted in the courtyard below. Kennet moved to the window, Rickon at his heels. Below, a guard was dragging a struggling man toward the gate to Wintertown, while another guard kept the gathering crowd at bay. The fever has found another, Kennet murmured, his face grave. Young Kirk Snow, if I'm not mistaken. Rickon watched the scene unfold, his small hands clenching into fists. After the commotion in the courtyard died down, Maester Kennet sighed heavily and turned back to Rickon. Your father will want to be informed immediately, he said, gathering his robes. This makes the 5th case this week. Rickon nodded, his mind still dwelling on the possibilities of invisible enemies and the fragmented knowledge that seemed both alien and familiar. As they descended the tower stairs, a servant girl hurried toward them, her face flushed from exertion. Maester Kennet, she panted, Lady Alice Anne requests your presence at once. Rickon's heart stuttered. Is she ill? He asked, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. The maid shook her head quickly. No, young lord. She's just feeling a bit faint. She wishes to consult with the maester about her condition. Relief flooded through Rickon. The pregnancy was still new, barely 3 moons along. He'd overheard the maids whispering about it when they thought no one was listening. Another Stark child, perhaps a brother or sister for him, though the prospect filled him with both anticipation and dread. Winter was a dangerous time to bring new life into the world. Go, Rickon said to Kennet. I'll find my father myself. The maester hesitated, then nodded. Remember what we discussed today, my lord. Observation and record-keeping are our strongest weapons against this fever. Rickon made his way across the courtyard, past the guards who nodded respectfully as he passed. The great keep loomed before him, its ancient stones radiating a subtle warmth that defied the bitter cold. Inside, servants moved with quiet efficiency, their faces tense with worry. He found his father in his solar, bent over a map of the north, his brow furrowed in concentration. Lord Cregan looked up as Rickon entered, his stern features softening almost imperceptibly. Rickon, he acknowledged. Your lessons with Kennet are finished early today. There was another case of the fever in Wintertown, Rickon reported, standing straight as he'd been taught. Kirk Snow. The guards took him to the quarantine area. Cregan's expression darkened. I see. He gestured to a chair across from him. Sit. There are matters we should discuss. Rickon climbed into the chair, his feet dangling above the floor. The solar was warm, heated by the hot springs that ran through Winterfell's walls, but there was a chill that seemed to emanate from his father himself. Lady Alizanne, Cregan began, his voice carefully measured, is with child, as you may have heard. Rickon nodded. The servants talk. A brief smile touched Cregan's lips. Little escapes your notice, does it? Yes, she carries a child. She has not caught any fever, but the maester advises caution. Even at this early stage, she must not exert herself. Will she be all right? Rickon asked, thinking of his own mother, who had died bringing him into the world. Something flickered across Cregan's face, a shadow of old grief. He was silent for a long moment, his fingers tracing the outline of Winterfell on the map before him. Your mother was the same, he said finally, his voice softer than Rickon had ever heard it. Arra was always concerned for others, even when she should have been concerned for herself. Rickon sat perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. His father rarely spoke of his mother, and never at such length. She was strong, Cregan continued, his eyes focused on something beyond the solar walls. A true daughter of the North. We grew up together, you know. The Norreys and Starks have close ties. She could outride most men by the time she was 12, and had a laugh that could warm the coldest winter night. Rickon tried to picture her, this woman he had never known but whose blood ran in his veins. What did she look like? Like the North itself, Cregan said. Dark hair, like yours. Blue eyes that could flash like steel when she was angry. She was small in stature, but never in presence. He paused. You have her look about you sometimes. When you're thinking hard on something. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Rickon gathered his courage. Father, how did you become Lord of Winterfell? I know grandfather died when you were young. Cregan's face hardened slightly. I was 13 when my father died, Lord Rickon, for whom you were named. Too young to rule alone, the council decided. His voice took on a bitter edge. My uncle Bernard was named regent until I came of age. Was he a good regent? Rickon asked. He was, ambitious, Cregan replied carefully. Too ambitious, perhaps. The North needed strength after my father passed, not hesitation. When I reached 16, the age of majority, Bernard was reluctant to surrender his power. Rickon listened intently as his father described the growing tensions between himself and his uncle, the whispered councils, the divided loyalties among the northern houses. By the time I was 18, it became clear that Bernard had no intention of stepping aside. He had grown too fond of ruling, and his sons had grown accustomed to the privileges of power. Cregan's jaw tightened. I had to act decisively. With the support of House Dustin, House Manderley and House Sirwin, I seized control of Winterfell and imprisoned Bernard and his sons. What happened to them? Rickon asked, both fascinated and troubled by this story of familial conflict. They remain imprisoned near the wall, Cregan said. Treated well, but contained. Bernard will remain there until his death. His sons may eventually earn their freedom, if they prove loyal. The implications were clear, a stark reminder of the price of challenging Stark authority. After securing my position, Cregan continued, his voice softening again, I married your mother. Arra had been my friend since childhood, but during those difficult years, she became much more. She stood by me when others wavered. She was the first to call me the true Lord of Winterfell. Rickon could hear the pain beneath his father's measured tones. And then she died giving birth to me. Cregan looked at him directly, grey eyes meeting grey. Yes. The birthing bed took her, as it takes too many women. But she gave me you, Rickon. Her last gift to the north. The weight of those words settled heavily on Rickon's small shoulders. He was not just a boy, but a legacy, the product of his mother's sacrifice and his father's ambition. "Is that why you named me after your father?" he asked. Cregan nodded. "To honor both him and her. She chose the name before." He trailed off. "Your mother believed you would be special, Rickon. Even before you were born." "And your mother was right," Cregan said, his voice growing firmer. "You are special, Rickon. Smart and mature for your age. You are everything I could hope for in an heir." Rickon felt a warmth spread through his chest at his father's rare praise. He sat up straighter, trying to appear worthy of such words. "In these troubled times, we Starks must endure and stay together," Cregan continued, leaning forward slightly. "There is an old saying that my father told me, when the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives." Rickon nodded solemnly, committing the words to memory. They resonated with something deep within him. "I see that you and Alizanne have formed a bond," Cregan said, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a rare show of warmth. The faint lines that appeared transformed his stern face, making him look younger for a brief moment. "How did you meet Alizanne?" Rickon asked, seizing the opportunity to learn more about his stepmother and father's history. Cregan's expression shifted, becoming distant as if looking back through time. He straightened the map before him before answering. "It was during the final days of the Dance of Dragons," he began. "I had led our northern forces south to support the Blacks Rhaenyra's faction. By the time we reached King's Landing, Aegon II was already dead, poisoned by his own men." Rickon listened intently as his father described the chaos that followed, the arrests he'd ordered, the swift justice he'd dispensed as Hand of the King during what later became known as the Hour of the Wolf. "I had Lord Corlys Velaryon in chains for his part in the treason," Cregan continued. "The young king, Aegon III, had pardoned him, but as Hand, I could have executed him regardless." Cregan's lips curved slightly. "That's when Alizanne approached me. She had fought bravely throughout the war, commanding archers at the Battle of the King's Road. Her nephew, Benjicot Blackwood, had broken the flank of Lord Boros Baratheon's forces, and Alizanne's archers had slain the knights and unhorsed Boros himself." Rickon's eyes widened. He tried to imagine Alizanne, who often read him stories and showed him how to identify the constellations, commanding hundreds of archers on a battlefield. "She came to me about Lord Corlys," Cregan continued. "Not begging or pleading as others had done, but speaking of honor, of what was best for the realm. She argued that executing Corlys would only prolong the bitterness of war." His father paused, a distant look in his eyes. "She was unlike any woman I had met, fierce as any northern maiden but with the political mind of a Southron lord. We spoke long into the night, debating justice and mercy." "And you listened to her," Rickon said, understanding dawning. "Is that why you married her? Because she challenged you?" A rare, genuine laugh escaped Cregan. "Partly," Cregan admitted. "It was the first time since your mother that someone had challenged me and made me consider another path." He looked at Rickon directly. "Sometimes strength is knowing when not to use your power, son. Alizanne taught me that." "Did you love her right away?" Rickon asked, curious about this softer side of his stern father. Cregan considered the question with the same seriousness he gave to matters of state. "Not at first. Respect came before affection. But love grew, as it often does when rooted in mutual regard." He paused. "After losing your mother, I had not expected to find such a companion again." The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the solar. Outside, snow began to fall, thick white flakes that muffled the sounds of the castle. "The winter fever will get worse before it improves," Cregan said, abruptly returning to the present concerns. "We must prepare Winterfell. The stores will need to be rationed more strictly. If the quarantine must continue through spring, we'll need to ensure we have enough to sustain us." Rickon nodded, following his father's shift in focus. Maester Kenneth was teaching me about previous outbreaks. He said isolation helps, and cleanliness too. Wise counsel, Cregan acknowledged. What else did he teach you? Rickon hesitated, uncertain how his father would receive his strange ideas about invisible creatures causing disease. He showed me records from past outbreaks. In some cases, burning affected areas helped contain the spread. Cregan's expression darkened. A last resort, but one we may need to consider if the fever spreads further in Wintertown. He studied Rickon for a moment. You understand what that means? The suffering it would cause. Yes, Rickon said quietly. But sometimes a lord must weigh the suffering of the few against the survival of the many. That's what Maester Kenneth said. Something like pride flickered in Cregan's eyes. You listen well. Too many men twice your age fail to grasp such hard truths. A knock at the door interrupted them. A guard entered, bowing briefly. Lord Stark, Lady Alice-Anne asks if you might join her in her chambers when convenient. The maester has seen to her and departed. Cregan nodded. Tell her I'll come shortly. As the guard left, he turned back to Rickon. You should rest. Tomorrow, I want you to join me as I inspect our stores and speak with the guards at the quarantine zone. Rickon slid from his chair, recognizing the dismissal. Father, he said, pausing at the door, I've been thinking about ways we might better understand the fever. If we could see what causes it. Another time, Rickon, Cregan said, though not unkindly. For now, we must deal with what we know, not what we wish to know. Rickon nodded, hiding his disappointment. As he walked through the corridors toward his chambers he was intercepted by Aunt Sara. Her keen eyes studied his downturned face. Why so grumpy, little wolf? She asked, ruffling his dark hair. You look like someone stole your honey cake. Rickon shrugged, not wanting to burden her with his frustrations. It's nothing. Sara crouched down to his level, her weathered hands adjusting his fur collar. Nothing, is it? I've never known a Stark to brood over nothing. Her eyes softened. Would a walk in the wolf's wood help chase away this nothing? The air is crisp, but the snow has stopped falling for now. The suggestion banished the clouds from Rickon's expression. His eyes lit up, thoughts of invisible diseases and his father's dismissal momentarily forgotten. Can we really? Even with the fever? Sara nodded. The fresh air will do us good. The fever spreads in crowded places, not in the open woods. She tapped his nose playfully. Besides, a little cold never hurt a Stark. They bundled up in their warmest furs, Sara wrapping an extra scarf around Rickon's neck despite his protests that he wasn't a baby. 3 guards joined them at the hunter's gate, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The wolf's wood stretched before them, ancient sentinels and ironwoods dusted with snow. Rickon felt the tension leave his shoulders as they walked beneath the towering trees. Here, away from the worried whispers of Winterfell, it was easier to breathe. Did father tell you about Lady Alice-Anne? He asked as they followed a narrow game trail. That she's with child? Aye, the whole castle knows by now. Sara smiled joyfully. She'll make a fine mother. Rickon kicked at a pine cone, sending it skittering across the snow. As Rickon was about to respond, a faint sound caught his attention. He stopped, head tilted. Did you hear that? He asked, turning toward a dense thicket of brambles. Sara frowned. Hear what? There it was again, a weak, high-pitched chirping. Without hesitation, Rickon darted off the path, plunging through the snow toward the sound. Rickon! Stop! Sara called after him, alarm clear in her voice. There could be anything in those bushes. But Rickon was already on his hands and knees, pushing aside the snow-laden branches. At the base of a gnarled ironwood, he found the source of the sound. A tiny bird, no larger than his palm, chirped feebly in the snow. Around it lay the frozen bodies of 3 others, its nest mates, he realized with a pang. The nest itself was half buried in snow several feet above, knocked from its perch by wind or some predator. "Oh," he breathed, carefully scooping the small creature into his cupped hands. It had a bald head and its grey feathers barely grown in, eyes still cloudy blue. Its tiny heart fluttered against his palm like the beating of a moth's wings. Sara caught up to him, the guards close behind, hands on their sword hilts. Her expression softened when she saw what he'd found. "Poor little thing," she murmured. "It won't last long out here." Rickon was already opening his furs, creating a warm pocket against his chest where he gently placed the chick. It chirped again, a sound so fragile it might break. "Please, Aunt Sara," he pleaded, looking up at her with wide eyes. "Let me take care of it. I can keep it warm in my room, and Maester Kennet might have something to feed it." Sara sighed, looking from the boy to the tiny life he sheltered. "Rickon, it's very small and weak. Chicks need their mothers to survive, especially in winter. We don't even know what kind of bird it is." "I can be its mother," Rickon insisted, his voice determined. "Father says I'm smarter than most grown men anyway. I can learn what it needs." A smile tugged at Sara's lips despite her reservations. "Are you now? And when did Lord Cregan say such a thing?" "Today. He said I was everything he could hope for in an heir." Pride colored Rickon's voice as he carefully adjusted his furs to keep the chick warm without crushing it. Sara's expression softened. "Did he now?" She shook her head, relenting. "Very well, little lord. You may try to save your bird. But if it dies despite your care, you mustn't take it too hard. That's the way of nature sometimes." As they made their way back to Winterfell, the tiny bird nestled against his chest. Rickon felt a strange connection to the creature, a kinship born of shared vulnerability. Like him, the bird had lost its mother. Like him, it was small but determined to survive. "What will you name it?" Sara asked as the walls of Winterfell came into view. Rickon considered for a moment, feeling the flutter of the chick's heartbeat against his skin. "Zenith," he decided. "Because someday this one will fly high enough to see everything." Sara smiled, though her eyes held a touch of sadness. "A fine name." She squeezed his shoulder gently. "Let's get Zenith to Maester Kennet before he freezes or starves." ___. "It is a snow eagle," Kennet exclaimed, adjusting his spectacles as he examined the frail creature in the wool-lined box. "Look at those talons beginning to form, and the distinctive grey patterning on the wing stubs. Quite rare this far from the highest peaks of the northern mountains." Rickon leaned closer, studying the tiny bird with newfound wonder. "A snow eagle? Like in old Nan's stories?" "The very same," Kennet nodded, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Though I must warn you, young lord, they are notoriously difficult to raise by hand. In all my years studying at the Citadel, I can scarcely name any which have been successfully tamed by humans." The maester's chain clinked softly as he shook his head. "Their diet is specific, fresh meat only, never dead more than an hour. They require heights from which to survey their domain. And their temperament?" He trailed off, eyeing the chick dubiously. "Snow eagles are not pets, my lord. They're wild creatures, proud and fierce. Even if it survives, it may never truly bond with you." "What about the falconers?" Rickon asked, thinking of the hawks and other birds of prey kept in Winterfell's mews. "They train birds. Those are goshawks and peregrines, bred for generations to accept the glove," Kennet explained. "Snow eagles are different. They've been known to attack their handlers once full grown. Their wingspan can reach 8 feet, and those talons." He gestured to the tiny pinpricks that would one day become deadly weapons. "They can pierce boiled leather as easily as parchment." Rickon carefully stroked the chick's head with one finger. It chirped weakly, its beak opening in silent demand. "I'm not afraid," he said simply. Kennet sighed, recognizing the stark stubbornness that had taken root. "Very well. I'll show you how to prepare its food properly. But remember, the likelihood of success is minimal. He provided Rickon with a small box lined with wool scraps, and for the next hour, Kenneth demonstrated how to feed the chick a mixture of moistened bread and raw meat paste with a small wooden splint. It will need to be fed every 3 hours, day and night, he instructed. Rickon absorbed every instruction with intense concentration, asking questions that impressed even the old maester with their insight. How often have snow eagles been successfully tamed? Rickon asked as he successfully fed the chick its first morsel of food. The chick greedily snapping at it and swallowing it before chirping for more. Kenneth stroked his beard thoughtfully. There are stories, mostly legends. The wildlings beyond the wall speak of supposed skin changers who could bond with eagles. And there was one account, from the reign of Theon Stark, the hungry wolf. A Stark daughter supposedly raised a snow eagle that fought beside her against Andal invaders. He adjusted his spectacles. But such tales grow in the telling. I'll name it Zenith, Rickon declared again, watching as the chick settled back into its nest of wool, its tiny crop now bulging with food. A grand name for such a small creature, Kenneth remarked dryly. Remember, you must feed it every 2 hours, day and night. Your sleep will suffer. Rickon nodded solemnly. I understand. As if to emphasize the point, the castle bells began to toll the hour of evening meal. Rickon carefully placed the box containing Zenith near the hearth in his chamber, ensuring it was warm but not too close to the flames. I'll be back soon, he promised the sleeping chick, before hurrying to the great hall. The evening meal was subdued, as all gatherings had been since news of the winter fever reached Winterfell. Lord Cregan sat at the high table with Lady Alys beside him, her face paler than usual but her smile warm as Rickon approached. Aunt Sara was already seated, saving a place for him. How fares your little foundling? She asked as he slid onto the bench. It's a snow eagle, Rickon replied, unable to keep the excitement from his voice despite the somber atmosphere. Maester Kenneth says they're very rare. Sara's eyebrows rose in surprise. A snow eagle? Here in the Wolf's Wood? They usually nest in the highest peaks. Perhaps it was blown off course in the last storm, Rickon suggested, helping himself to a bowl of hot stew. The savory aroma reminded him how hungry he'd grown during his afternoon with Kenneth. Or perhaps the gods guided it to you, Sara said softly, her eyes thoughtful. The old gods work in mysterious ways. Rickon considered this as he ate, wondering if there was some purpose to finding Zenith. The old gods rarely spoke clearly, but sometimes they sent signs. A dire wolf appearing south of the wall. Ravens carrying unusual messages. Perhaps a snow eagle falling into his path was another such sign. After the meal, he approached the high table to bid good night to his father and Lady Alys. Maester Kenneth tells me you've found a bird, Lord Cregan said, his expression unreadable. Rickon nodded. A snow eagle chick, father. I'm going to raise it. Cregan exchanged a glance with Alys before responding. Eagles are not dogs or horses, Rickon. They're wild creatures. I know, Rickon said firmly. But this one needs me. It would die without help. And what will you do when it's grown? Cregan asked. A full-grown snow eagle could take a child's arm off with one strike. Rickon hadn't thought that far ahead. I'll build a proper mew for it. Learn how to handle it safely. Alys placed a gentle hand on Cregan's arm. Let him try, my lord. The responsibility might be good for him. Cregan studied his son's face for a long moment. Very well. But if the bird becomes dangerous as it grows, you will release it back to the wild. Understand? Yes, father, Rickon agreed, relief flooding through him. And your other duties come first, Cregan added firmly. Your lessons, your training. The bird cannot become a distraction. It won't, Rickon promised, though privately he wondered how he would manage the frequent feedings Kenneth had prescribed while maintaining his normal schedule. That night, as the castle settled into silence, Rickon sat beside the small box near his hearth, watching Zenith sleep. The chick's tiny chest rose and fell rapidly, its life so fragile it seemed a miracle it survived at all. When the hour came for another feeding, Rickon carefully prepared the meat as Kenneth had shown him, warming it slightly in his hands before offering it to the chick. Zenith's eyes, still cloudy blue, opened at the smell of food, its beak opening wide in silent demand. "There you go," Rickon murmured as the chick accepted the morsel. "You're strong. You'll grow big enough to soar above the tallest towers of Winterfell." Outside, snow began to fall again, thick flakes that drifted past his window and accumulated on the sill. The winter fever continued its silent spread through the north, and beyond the walls of Winterfell, danger lurked in many forms. But here, in this moment, Rickon felt a strange peace as he cared for the tiny creature that fate had placed in his hands. The pattern continued through the night: sleep for 2 hours, wake to feed Zenith, sleep again. By morning, Rickon's eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but the chick seemed stronger, its chirps more insistent when he approached the box. "You've named it Zenith?" Alice Ann asked when she visited his chamber later that day, her curiosity piqued by the unusual addition to the household. She moved carefully, one hand resting on her still flat stomach in an unconscious gesture of protection. "It means the highest point," Rickon explained, proudly showing her how the chick now recognized him and responded to his voice. "Because snow eagles fly higher than any other bird." Alice Ann smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "A fitting name." She watched as Rickon fed the bird with surprising dexterity for a child of 6. "You have gentle hands." "That's good. Maester Kenneth says snow eagles are hard to tame," Rickon admitted, his voice betraying a concern he couldn't quite hide. Alice Ann settled onto a low stool beside him, her movements careful and deliberate. "The hardest creatures to tame are often the most rewarding, Rickon. Look at your father." A conspiratorial smile played at her lips. "Some would say the Lord of Winterfell is as untamable as any snow eagle, yet here we are." Rickon couldn't help but return her smile. The comparison between his stern father and the fierce birds of the mountains seemed oddly fitting. Does he talk about my mother often?" The question slipped out before he could reconsider. Alice Ann's expression softened. Her fingers, long and elegant, folded in her lap as she considered her words carefully. "Not often," she admitted. "Grief can be like a wound that never fully heals, especially for men like your father who believe they must always appear strong." She reached out to brush a strand of dark hair from Rickon's forehead. "But when he does speak of her, his voice changes. Becomes gentler. Your mother was his first love, Rickon, and nothing can ever change that." Rickon nodded, digesting this. As Alice Ann brushed his hair, the excitement of the day finally caught up to him and he slowly fell into deep sleep. Hope you enjoyed the chapter. Extra long chapter coming up next, and maybe little Rickon might just get a companion XD. If you want to see images of baby Zenith, Alice Ann Blackwood, Cregan Stark, and Rickon Stark, please head on over to my Patreon. If you're enjoying the story and want to read one advanced chapter ahead of their public release, then please head over to my Patreon. patreon.com/darkebones. Chapter 7, Chapter 6, The Awakening, 6. The months passed, and winter's grip on the north slowly began to loosen. The winter fever, which had claimed so many lives across the 7 kingdoms, gradually lost its potency. By mid-133 AC, new cases in Winterfell had become rare, and those who fell ill often recovered after a few days of fever rather than succumbing to the deadly 4th-day crisis. Rickon stood in the courtyard of Winterfell, his arm raised high as Zenith circled overhead. The once tiny chick had transformed into a magnificent predator, his wingspan casting impressive shadows across the packed snow. Rickon felt a surge of pride as the snow eagle tucked his wings and dove, responding to the subtle gesture of his hand. "Still showing off with that beast of yours?" Arra Snow called from across the yard, her breath forming clouds in the crisp morning air. The steward's bastard daughter leaned against a wooden post, her dark hair escaping from beneath her woolen cap. Rickon grinned. He's not showing off. He's hunting. He raised his arm again, the thick leather brace protecting his forearm and shoulder from Zenith's wickedly sharp talons. The eagle responded immediately, banking sharply before landing with practiced precision on the offered perch. The impact still made Rickon brace himself. At 10 kilograms, and with a wingspan of 2 meters, Zenith was heavier than some hunting dogs, his powerful form a far cry from the helpless chick Rickon had rescued over a year ago. "Good boy," Rickon murmured, offering a strip of rabbit meat which Zenith took with surprising delicacy. The eagle's amber eyes fixed on him with an intensity that still sometimes sent shivers down Rickon's spine. Not fear, but awareness of the wild, untamable nature that remained despite their bond. "Maester Kenneth says he's still growing," Rickon told Edda as she approached cautiously. "And the only one successfully raised by a human." "Successfully?" Edda raised an eyebrow, keeping a respectful distance. "Didn't he nearly take off your father's hand barely a moon ago?" Rickon winced at the memory. Lord Cregan had approached too quickly while Zenith was feeding, and the eagle had reacted with lightning speed. Only his father's battle-honed reflexes had prevented serious injury. "That was a misunderstanding," Rickon said defensively. "Zenith was protecting his food. He's much better now." As if to prove the point, Zenith fluffed his magnificent crest of dark brown feathers, the white underbelly contrasting sharply with the darker plumage of his back and wings. He made a soft chirping sound that Rickon had come to recognize as contentment. "If you say so," Edda replied skeptically. "Your stepmother still won't let I'm anywhere near the baby, though." Ali's Anne had given birth to a healthy girl 1 moon past, named Sara Stark after an ancestor from before the conquest. Rickon's half-sister had his mother's dark hair but the Stark signature grey eyes. Rickon adored her. "That's just being cautious," Rickon said, though he understood the concern. Zenith was still a wild creature at heart, his instincts unpredictable. "Besides, I wouldn't want Zenith near a squalling infant either. The noise would upset him." He stroked the eagle's chest feathers, feeling the powerful heartbeat beneath. Sometimes, especially at night, Rickon swore he could sense Zenith's emotions: hunger, excitement, the thrill of flight. He often woke from dreams where he soared high above Winterfell, the world spread beneath him in miniature, the wind rushing through through Zenith's feathers. Maester Kenneth had listened to these accounts with scholarly interest, making notes in his journal about the bond between boy and bird. "Remarkable," he'd murmured. "The wildlings speak of skin changers who can see through the eyes of their animals. Perhaps there is some truth to those tales after all." "Lord Rickon," a voice called from across the yard. Maester Kenneth himself approached, his chain clinking softly with each step. "Your father requests your presence in the Great Hall. The envoys from White Harbour have arrived." Rickon nodded, turning to the wooden perch he had constructed near the armory. "Zenith, stay," he commanded, transferring the eagle to the perch with practiced ease. Zenith settled, his talons gripping the weathered wood, fierce amber eyes watching Rickon intently. "Will you be long?" Edda asked, falling into step beside him as he headed toward the Great Hall. "I thought we might check on the glass gardens later. The winter roses are blooming early this year." "I shouldn't be," Rickon replied, adjusting the leather brace on his shoulder. The tanner had designed it specifically to distribute Zenith's weight and protect Rickon's skin from the eagle's sharp talons. It was a masterwork of boiled leather and reinforced padding, allowing Rickon to carry the massive bird without injury. The Great Hall buzzed with activity as Rickon entered. Lord Cregan sat at the high table, Lady Ali's Anne beside him, little Sara sleeping peacefully in her arms. Before them stood 3 men in the blue-green colours of House Manderley, their sea-weathered faces serious as they addressed the Lord of Winterfell. Rickon slipped into his customary place at his father's right hand, noting the tension in the room. Something important was being discussed. "The winter fever has receded entirely from White Harbour," my lord," the eldest representative was saying. "But the toll on our trade has been severe. Ships from Bravos and even Pentos refuse to dock, fearing contagion." "The same has been reported from Barrowton and Torrens Square," Cregan replied, his voice measured. "Yet we must rebuild. The North endured worse during the Dance of Dragons, and we recovered." "With respect, Lord Stark," another envoy interjected, "the situation in White Harbour is particularly dire. Our granaries were depleted by the quarantine, and with reduced trade, we struggle to replenish them." Rickon listened attentively, his mind already racing with potential solutions. The North's recovery from the winter fever would require more than just time, it needed innovation, adaptation. "If I may, Father," Rickon said, waiting for Cregan's nod before continuing. "Perhaps we could offer assurances to foreign merchants. If Maester Kennet were to certify that the fever has passed, and we established a period of observation for incoming ships." The Manderley envoys regarded him with surprise, clearly not expecting such a measured suggestion from a boy of nearly 7 name days. But Cregan nodded thoughtfully. "A sound proposal," he said. "Maester Kennet, what say you to this plan?" The old maester tugged at his chain thoughtfully. "It could work, my lord. The fever has indeed lost its potency. Those who contract it now rarely perish, and the period of contagion is shorter. I could draft letters with my findings to be sent to the free cities." "See it done," Cregan commanded. "And what of the other matter?" he asked, turning back to the Manderleys. The lead envoy cleared his throat. "The shipbuilding proceeds as planned, my lord. Lord Manderley believes we can complete the first 3 vessels by year's end, provided we receive the timber from the Wolf's Wood as promised." Shipbuilding? This was the first Rickon had heard of such a project. He glanced at his father, curiosity piqued. "The timber will be delivered," Cregan assured them. "The North must look to its own defense in these uncertain times." The meeting continued, with discussions of harvests, taxes, and the rebuilding of Winter Town. Throughout it all, Rickon found his thoughts periodically drifting to Zenith, feeling the eagle's restlessness even from a distance. The connection between them had grown stronger over the moons, sometimes manifesting in shared sensations that Rickon couldn't fully explain. When the council finally adjourned, Rickon approached his father as the Manderley envoys were being shown to their quarters. "Ships, father? Are we building a fleet?" Cregan studied his son for a moment before responding. "A small one, yes. The winter fever reminded us how vulnerable we are when cut off from trade. The North needs to have ships of our own, not just rely on White Harbour's merchants," Cregan explained, his voice lowering so only Rickon could hear. "We lost too many good men during the dance because we had no swift way to move our forces." Rickon nodded, understanding immediately. "And with our own ships, we could trade directly with Bravos and the other free cities." A flicker of pride crossed Cregan's face. "Precisely. The Manderleys have the shipwrights, but we have the timber and iron they need." He placed a hand on Rickon's shoulder, the weight of it reassuring. "This is the future of the North we're building, son." "Your future." The responsibility in those words settled on Rickon's shoulders, heavier than Zenith could ever be. He straightened his back instinctively. "I'd like to see the shipyards when they begin construction," Rickon said. "Perhaps study the designs." Cregan studied him with those penetrating grey eyes. "You've an interest in ships now? I thought your passions lay with your birds and your books." "I have an interest in the North, father," Rickon replied, the words coming easily despite their weight. "In making us stronger." Something shifted in Cregan's expression, a subtle softening around the eyes. "Very well. When the first keel is laid at White Harbour, we'll make the journey together." The promise warmed Rickon more than he expected. Time alone with his father had become increasingly rare since Sara's birth and the demands of rebuilding after the winter fever. A sharp mental tug pulled at Rickon's attention. Zenith was growing impatient. The sensation was becoming more distinct with each passing moon, less like imagination and more like a real connection. I should return Zenith to his muse before the midday meal, Rickon said. Cregan nodded. Go on, then. But don't forget your lessons with Maester Kennet this afternoon. The man complains you've been neglecting your High Valyrian studies. Only because I've been focusing on the old tongue, Rickon defended himself. The ancient language of the first men had become a fascination lately, especially after finding old texts in the library that contained strange runes alongside more familiar lettering. Outside, the air had warmed considerably, the morning's chill giving way to the promise of spring. Rickon found Zenith exactly where he'd left him, though the eagle's posture betrayed his restlessness. Sorry to keep you waiting, Rickon murmured, approaching with his arm extended. Zenith made a low ching sound, then hopped onto the offered brace. Your father's planning something big, isn't he? Edda's voice startled him. She'd been waiting by the armory, her cheeks flushed from the cold. Ships, Rickon confirmed, seeing no reason to keep it secret. We're building a northern fleet. Edda's eyes widened. Real warships? Like the Bravasi have. I don't know the designs yet, Rickon admitted, starting toward the muse with Edda falling in step beside him. But father says we'll visit White Harbor when construction begins. Take me with you. Edda said immediately, her excitement palpable. I've never seen the sea. Rickon smiled at her enthusiasm. It's not my decision, but I'll ask. They reached the muse, a sturdy structure Rickon had helped design specifically for Zenith. Unlike the traditional falcon muse, this one had higher ceilings and broader perches to accommodate the snow eagle's considerable size. Inside the muse, Rickon gently transferred Zenith to his favorite perch. The eagle settled, feathers ruffling before smoothing down as he accepted a final piece of meat from Rickon's fingers. I'll return before sunset, Rickon promised, stroking the soft feathers along Zenith's chest. The eagle butted his head softly against Rickon's palm, amber eyes half closing in contentment. The sensation of their connection hummed between them, a wordless understanding that transcended ordinary bonds between human and animal. He actually seems to understand you, Edda observed, maintaining a respectful distance. He does, Rickon replied simply, giving Zenith a final pat before securing the muse. I'll see about White Harbor, he promised Edda as they parted ways in the courtyard. With the afternoon stretching before him and his lessons with Maester Kennet not scheduled until later, Rickon made his way toward the family quarters. The corridors of Winterfell were warmer than the courtyard, heated by the hot springs that flowed through the walls. The ancient magic of the Starks, built into the very stones of their ancestral home. He approached the nursery quietly, pausing at the partially open door. Inside, the room was bathed in the golden light of afternoon, a fire crackling softly in the hearth. Lady Alice Anne sat in a cushioned chair near the flames, an open book in her lap. Across the room, little Sara lay in her ornately carved cot, the mobile of wooden animals spinning slowly above her. His half-sister's tiny hands reached upward, grasping at the dancing shapes, a soft gurgle of delight escaping her as a wooden dire wolf spun into her line of sight. The sound tugged at something deep in Rickon's chest. He'd never imagined feeling such fierce protectiveness for someone so small, so helpless. Yet from the moment he'd first held Sara, swaddled and red-faced, he'd known he would do anything to keep her safe. Are you going to lurk in the doorway all afternoon, or would you like to come in? Alice Anne asked without looking up from her book, a smile in her voice. Rickon stepped into the room, his footfalls silent on the thick carpet. I didn't want to disturb you if Sara was sleeping. As you can see, your sister is quite determined to stay awake, Alice Anne replied, marking her place in the book before setting it aside. She seems to think those wooden animals might escape if she takes her eyes off them. Approaching the cot, Rickon peered down at Sara. Her grey eyes, so like his own, fixed on him with surprising focus for one so young. A smile broke across her tiny face, toothless and perfect, her legs kicking excitedly beneath her blanket. She recognizes you, Alice Anne smiled, coming to stand beside him. Pride swelled in Rickon's chest. Of course she does. We Starks always recognize our pack. He reached down, offering his finger to Sara, who grasped it with surprising strength. How was your eagle training this morning? Alysanne asked, adjusting Sara's blanket with practiced ease. Zenith is responding well to the new commands, Rickon replied, still focused on his sister's grip. Though father thinks I spend too much time with him. Alysanne's hand paused briefly before resuming its task. Your father worries about your safety. Snow eagles aren't meant to be tamed. Zenith isn't tame, Rickon corrected. He's a partner. He struggled to find the right words to explain the connection he felt, the dreams of flight, the shared sensations. Like the dire wolves in the old stories. A thoughtful expression crossed Alysanne's face. Those old stories, they speak of more than just partnership, don't they? They talk of skin changers, of men who could see through the eyes of beasts. The word sent a shiver down Rickon's spine. It was too close to what he experienced with Zenith, too accurate a description of the dreams that felt more like memories upon waking. Have you been reading Northern legends? He asked, deflecting her implied question. We Blackwoods have an ancient history ourselves, skin changers and green seers have long been born into our bloodline, she replied smirking, reaching down to lift Sara from her cot. Would you like to hold her? She's been fed and changed, so she shouldn't soil your fine tunic. Rickon nodded eagerly, sitting in the chair Alysanne had vacated. She placed Sara carefully in his arms, adjusting his hold to support the baby's head properly. There, she said, stepping back. A natural, just like with your eagle. Sara gazed up at him, her tiny face solemn for a moment before breaking into another gummy smile. Something twisted in Rickon's chest, a fierce surge of love and protectiveness that threatened to overwhelm him. I'll keep you safe, little sister, he whispered, too softly for Alysanne to hear. The world can be dangerous, but you have the wolf's blood. And you have me. Your father tells me the Manderleys brought interesting news, Alysanne said, retrieving her book and settling in a chair opposite him. We're building ships at White Harbor, Rickon replied, his eyes still fixed on Sara. Father says it will help secure the North's future. A wise strategy, Alysanne nodded. The winter fever showed how vulnerable we are when trade routes are cut. And the seas hold many opportunities beyond mere commerce. Rickon looked up, intrigued by her tone. What do you mean? Knowledge, my dear stepson, she replied, tapping the cover of her book. The free cities have libraries that dwarf even the Citadel's collection. Texts from lost Valyria, scrolls from the Shadowlands beyond Assai. Her voice took on a dreamy quality that Rickon rarely heard from his practical stepmother. You think father would allow such books to be brought to Winterfell? He asked skeptically. Alysanne's smile was enigmatic. Your father is a practical man who understands the value of knowledge, particularly knowledge that could strengthen the North. She leaned forward slightly. And I've noticed your interest in the old texts, the ones with runes alongside the common tongue. Rickon tensed slightly. He hadn't realized his studies of the ancient First Men writings had been observed so closely. The old tongue is part of our heritage, he said carefully. Indeed it is, Alysanne agreed. Sara squirmed in his arms, drawing his attention back to her. One tiny hand had escaped her blanket and was reaching toward his face with determined concentration. I think she wants to grab your nose, Alysanne laughed, the serious moment broken. Rickon smiled, lowering his face just enough for Sara to pat his cheek with her soft, warm hand. The gesture, simple as it was, filled him with a contentment he couldn't quite explain. Father said we'll visit White Harbor when they lay the first keel, Rickon said, gently capturing Sara's exploring fingers. I'd like to see the designs they're using. You've developed quite an interest in shipbuilding suddenly, Alysanne observed. Any particular reason? Rickon shrugged, careful not to disturb Sara. I just want to understand. If these ships are meant to protect the North, to secure our future, then I should know how they work, what makes them strong. Alice Anne studied him with that penetrating gaze that sometimes reminded Rickon uncomfortably of Maester Kennet's scholarly scrutiny. You speak like a lord twice your age, she said finally. It's easy to forget you're not yet 7 named days. I'll be 7 in 2 moons, Rickon replied, a touch defensively. He hated being reminded of his youth.